Here.
Ed Bowman.
Yes, ma'am.
Susan Dolan. Here. Janet Emerson. Here. I was here, but I couldn't hear. Here. Lisa Emerson, here. Jason Ray.
Here.
Steve Dunker.
Here.
Sandra Hall. Here. Michael McDonough.
Here.
Charlotte Nelson. Here. Mark Moore.
Here.
Mary Jane Van Busker. Count four. Craig Walter.
Here. Educate me. What's that?
Counted four.
Oh, counted for. I thought you were speaking for it. We know where she's at. That's the one. All right. As we voted on last session, on May 13th, we decided to have a section for public comments. And each comment, each person who would like to speak will be given 3 minutes, and we've allowed 21 minutes for this time period. So is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak as far as public comments? Seeing none, we will move on to a little bit of rule information. And I'm going to clarify one of the things we were maybe a little bit too lax on last time, and that was on the order of friendly amendments. Greg was kind enough to get some information on this, and I'm just going to read it directly from the author, or I guess the person that would know a lot about it. Anyway, it says, once a motion has been made and seconded and stated by the chair, it belongs to the group as a whole, not to the individual who first proposed it. It is the group as a whole that must accept or reject any proposed amendment, whatever the intent of the proposer. To make a motion and a second have the same rights as the other members of the group, no more or no less. And when someone offers a friendly amendment, they suggest that the president say, or desire to say, a friendly amendment is handled just like any other amendment. It is seconded, and the language doesn't make people feel stupid, but sets the group in the right protocol or path. So, anytime we have a motion on the floor and we go to the point of making a minor adjustment or a friendly adjustment, if the motion's already been seconded and read by myself the first time, then it needs, the friendly amendment needs to be seconded, and that needs to be approved and then added to the original proposed amendment. Okay, does that make sense? Greg, is that
I'm sorry.
the way you understand it to be too? Based on, okay. I just want to make sure that we clarify that right off the bat. And then we'll go into officers' reports. And I guess minutes.
I have nothing.
Okay. We have, everybody got a copy, I would assume, of the final version of the minutes and had a chance to read them over. I will accept a motion to accept the minutes of May 13th as reported. So moved.
Second. Jim Major. Ted Bowman.
Yes.
Susan Dolan. Janet Emerson.
Yes.
Lisa Emerson. Yes. Jason Ray.
Yes.
Steve Duncan.
Yes.
Sandra Hartwell.
Yes.
Michael McDonough.
Yes.
Charlotte Nelson.
Yes.
Mark Moore.
Yes.
Mary Jane Van Busker.
Yes.
Craig Walter.
Yes.
Okay, from the, do we have anything from the vice chair at this time? No. Okay, not at this point. And then as far as treasurer, at the last meeting, we talked about the beginning of the budget, and we worked on the budget.
Haven't worked on a budget. I'm wondering, I guess that we are going to be allowed to start with 10,000. Am I correct in that? I mean, I have to have a starting point.
Yes.
Change that what it is.
That's what the city set aside.
Okay, so that's what we'll start at, and until we have any type of expenditures, I'll put together a budget of hard costs, and whatever else comes up will be amongst the group. Go from there, but we haven't incurred any cost whatsoever yet.
Okay, well, Sandy was very fortunate to be able to get a hold of Mr. Herbert Lunde, I guess?
Monday.
Yeah, from the West Plains Charter, under the asking of myself and the direction of Mr. Markison at the last meeting, because they had just gotten their charter passed this last spring. And they had a budget and everything like that, so he sent us their budget, and I kind of went through it a little bit, and I can give you a copy of it. They itemized. Under contract labor, they had an amount for $400 to Mr. Markison. They had attorney's fees of $7,674, and I'll just give this to you, I'm just going to kind of write it. And then they had other expenditures as far as contract labor of $2,242, and then material costs and printing. Basically, they have a web hosting website similar to we have. That there was a cost of $71 to. They had some paper expenses, printing and copying. Their printing and copying, a lot of it, I guess, was donated, but they only incurred $52.80. They produced brochures for the marketing of what was done, and they spent $111. They had postage of about $235 for postcards to send out to their fellow citizens, and then they incurred postage costs of all their literature of actually $3,254, which I thought was and then they had a presentation binder of $18. So, yes.
How big a town is this?
I'm not exactly sure how big West Plains is.
I did not ask that.
Okay.
I just wanted to go, I know that if you're gonna produce a charter bill that's about that big, for a town of 30,000 people.
They have about 31 pages in their charter.
Yeah. Well, I think that,
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to see how big a community it is.
Yeah, because they're checking.
We're checking out.
Yeah. I do have a copy of the West Plains Charter.
Looking forward, do we intend to produce copies of our charter so that people in the public can read?
Whether that be advisable, though, if we're gonna have be able to read
So,
it.
it's about a third of the population of Grey County, a little bit less, a little bit more than a third. And if we produce a book, a charter book, for 30,000 people, then not that everybody will want it, but you need to put it out there, and there will be a paper taken. In my last experience with this.
Well, my understanding is that, they're made available at certain locations, and they're downloadable off the internet, but the community doesn't normally.
The internet is not used by everybody. It is by you, it is by you, I use it in business. But there's a lot of people who are over the age of 50 that won't go near a computer. They don't want to, they read the newspapers.
Well, but I mean, and that's one of the things, Greg, we'll get into in a little bit later, because they had a very good marketing plan of how they marketed all the information out, and they had a list of all the organizations that they contacted, they actually spoke at. They went to group homes, they went to a lot of different areas to make sure that the information was out there on the charter, and they passed their charter at 78%.
I believe, but I don't know that I don't know where this West Plains, where's that?
Southeast Missouri, down by actually it's east of North Fork Lake.
I think it's not an inner suburb.
No.
Okay, there's planets of difference between the two communities. And, the difference is huge.
Okay.
And I think
12,270.
that's not just a matter of population.
Okay, but where are you going with this?
Where am I going with it?
Okay, where are you going with this? I mean,
Well, I think that if we're going to start throwing out numbers that are extremely low, that you just did, I think that.
well, and I'm not, okay, Greg, you're jumping to the point. All I was really doing was trying to list their itemized, not so much what they spent on it, but the items that they were covering, okay? So hopefully, I mean, We put together a group to go over for budget. I think it was Mark and Charlotte at the last meeting. And you agreed to help Mark, I think. And to actually try to put together a budget, or at least the items, so that we can start from some point.
Well, I know, but if you're going to do that, taking a city from a rural setting in suburb, in the southern part of Missouri, compared to an inner ring suburb in metropolitan largest metropolitan areas in Missouri, is a bad way to say, okay, well, this is what they spend, so we can expect to spend some in that area too. I don't think that's accurate.
I think what we were trying to do more than anything was to get an idea of how they spent their money, not so much the amount, but how they marketed it and what they did. We can put our own amount on it, we don't have to go by their amount. We were just trying to get an idea of how they marketed, what they did. That is more that this is for than anything else.
It would be a good idea, you might check with the MML, you might find some cities more comparable to Raytown to see how they marketed.
Well, at the last meeting, Mr. Markson did recommend West Plains, so, but, I mean, I would be interested in knowing what the budget was for the last one, and how that one got spent, so.
Well, let's ask for it.
Yeah, we can ask for it.
It's a matter of public record.
So right now, I just reviewed the 2005 final meeting, and it rolled in around 26,000.
Guys, we don't have any mics, you're gonna have to speak up.
Okay.
Let me repeat then, I just reviewed within the last month, the 2005 final meeting of the Charter Commission, and their final expenditure rolled in around 26,000.
So if it would be possible, if we could get that information for the charter, I think it would be enlightening.
Well, and again, we're just on a finding of facts.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but our commission is part of finding the facts, so we can see what tradition has been. I mean, we've got 5 different efforts that have been made.
Right.
And-
Well, but those are also dated too, so it costs.
Well, they are.
Yes, they are. And they're-
Let's go on, move on. Ken.
Yes, can we move on?
Does that mean we're not going to, or is it default on one of us here to do it on our own?
I've already had Mr. Markuson, all right, I'm just.
I know he told you to go do West Valley and all that.
Well, I already have a couple people working on it, and they can go review what was done before, and then report back to the group.
If it'd be possible, if I could have a copy of what we did before, I'd like to see.
Well, if I have a copy.
If you do
Yeah,
that.
I don't have one. no.
I know.
So we'll make a request to Teresa for a copy of what the final budget was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have mine.
All right, let's move on. Are there any other reports other than the old business where we'll talk about, we'll first start with the preamble and Articles 1 and 2, and then we'll get into discussion on Article 3. I don't know how many of us had a chance to look at the MML example for the preamble, but it seems to be very consistent with all communities around Kansas City that I've looked at, Belton, Jeff City, Raymore, Blue Springs, Lee Summit, West Plains. All the preambles seem to be very much alike. And so,
Mr. Chairman,
yeah, go ahead.
you asked that we produce a draft to work from.
Yes.
And
That's what I was getting.
I did one. I'm not the only one to do one.
Okay.
This is really simple.
And I,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I'm having a hard time hearing across the thing here, so I'm quite sure that Mike is having a hard time getting it on camera. We had a table down here the last time, and we had mics. So we need to ask the city, you
Well,
know,
we did.
where we can get some mics to do this with, because if I can't hear across the table with low voices, they're not gonna be able to hear it on the tape, or on the disc.
all out and then, put mats over them to, prevent tripping and so forth. And so it would be one of those things where we would have to get our own mics and preferably cordless, but,
Well, then we're all gonna have to talk about it.
yeah, we're just gonna have to scream. Very-
Put your outside voice.
Okay, I know that this is the one that you did, I think.
It is.
And was there, who else did you mention had done one?
I added,
Lisa has some concerns about some of the wording. The only thing I added outside of what's in the MML, other than comparing it to our last two efforts here at Raytown, was the section on terminology, which was an effort to answer what appeared to be a concern in the last one.
Okay. I know that in the city of Raymore's charter, they did have also a section, what is called terminology, but it was called definition, so.
And I just picked the word, we can call it whatever we want.
Would you want to read yours then, as far as what you produced? And,
In order to provide for the government of the city of Raytown, Missouri, and secure the benefits and advantages of constitutional home rule under the Constitution of the state of Missouri, the people of the city of Raytown adopt the following charter. Article 1 entitled Incorporation Names and Boundaries, Section 1.1 Incorporation Names and Boundaries. The inhabitants of the city of Raytown, Missouri, within the corporate limits as now established or as hereafter established and on file in the office of the city clerk as provided by law, shall continue to be a municipal body politic and corporate in perpetuity under the name of the city of Raytown. Section 1.2 terminology within this charter and for the purposes thereof, the terms City of Raytown, Missouri, City of Raytown, the city, and our city are synonymous and may be used interchangeably.
Okay, let's really stop there, since that's the end of Article 1. Lisa, go ahead.
I was wondering regarding the terminology section, is there a reason we could not simply just write City of Raytown every time rather than changing it up? I'm not seeing a reason for changing each.
The only reason that I did that was that all of the past efforts and all of the examples used the term the city so frequently that,
Just chop it up.
you know,
So, I mean, I can't see any use for City of Raytown, Missouri.
I'm not married to it.
Okay.
My concern was just that as things rolled along, and I believe you were reading, I don't know whether it was reading the Article 3 proposition or maybe it was just the sample charter, the term the city appeared frequent.
And would there need to be anything, for instance, about the people or citizens being interchangeable with people or anyone else who happens to be in the city?
That's certainly easy enough.
I didn't know if we might.
I know we've
consider
used,
that.
I have seen the term residence and I've seen the term, so that's easy enough to have.
Or maybe we just keep it consistent and not really, I don't know.
Or use the same word.
Greg, you got something to? Okay. Well, I know you have a concern about the mic, and I mean, at this point, I don't know what to do with it at this
The
reason
reason-
of it.
If you want to discuss it, have it in the middle of Mr. Bowman's. Did you want to finish with Mr. Bowman's?
Well, I think we need to first discuss the preamble and then the first two parts of the article, and then continue on with Article 2. I just happened to notice, Ted, that in many of the other charters, they start with "We the people of and they name the city, "We the people of Raytown, Missouri, in order to provide for a better government for the city of Raytown, Missouri, and secure the benefits." So, I mean, it kind of helps define who's writing this, I guess you might say. So I didn't know that was something that needs to be concerned. But, I mean, that seems to be really consistent with probably about mean, out of the 6 or 7 that I've looked at, I think 4 of them say that in front of it, so I'm not sure how everybody else will look at that.
Looking at it, it looks to me like it says the same thing, because down here it says people of the city of Greytown adopt the following. And it says the exact same thing.
And it does say that a number of times.
I like this.
Go ahead.
I like the sound of it. I think it's consistent with the Constitution, doesn't it? We the people.
Okay.
Speak up.
I beg your pardon? I said, I like the sound of we the people. I think it's consistent with the Constitution. I think it sounds good. I think people might embrace it. I see nothing wrong with the wording as is, except for that I do prefer the sound of we the people.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Can Ted read Article 2 so we can discuss it?
No, no, I want to go article by article.
Okay,
So
well,
let's start with this preamble, we'll go from there. Any other discussion? I mean, we all have something to say about this, I'm sure.
yeah,
Go for it.
I just agree with Susan about, it sounds more in line with the traditional idea for a charter. Traditionally and historically, charters, constitutions, Magna Carta, that sort of thing, they were implemented in order to restrain the power of government and ensure individual rights. And throughout history, it usually starts off with, we have these things, and then this is how we're going to keep those things, as far as, person, property, that sort of thing. And then it goes into what the limits are on the government that is being constrained. And so this sort of just starts off with, here's how we're going to benefits and advantages for the city government. So it seems a little bit at odds with historical usage of introductions to charters and purposes of charters. So I would also like to see some wording along those lines.
You gonna make a suggestion there? Yes.
I can. I sent it to Ted right before this meeting. But that's what I was talking about, Article 2, is because for that reason, with such a preamble to describe the rights of the citizens and the restrictions of the government, Article 2 is that, as written, is counter to that and expresses how liberally the powers of government can be applied and construed. And my thought was to be more like the Constitution, Bill of Rights, that sort of thing, and expressly state what it is citizens have and what the government can do. So my suggestion, which I was just throwing together here, if we start off with the charter being about the people, every inhabitant of and visitor to the city of Greytown is acknowledged to be endowed with self-sovereignty and therefore the natural right to life, liberty, and property. The city of Greytown shall not infringe upon the individual's sovereignty nor upon protective guarantees provided by the Bill of Rights of the United States. The powers of the city of Greytown shall further be constrained by its inhabitants, the Constitution of the State of Missouri, the Constitution of the United States of America, and the powers conferred by law when consistent with those constraints. And that's just my suggestion.
So that was on 2.1?
I don't know whether it should modify Article 2 or if it should be more of a preamble. So it takes.
Okay.
What, did you get that from another model?
Yes and no. There are various charters that start off with similar types of things. I wrote this myself. But there are other ones that include all sorts of positive rights as they go through it, which I did not include. I was trying to keep it simple and brief so we can get to the meat of the deal, but I've taken bits and pieces from various charters, both in Missouri, but mostly I was looking at other ones across the country, some of them back east, so they're probably older.
All right, Greg, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Lisa, is that a motion?
No, she was, I mean, there's no motion on the table.
Well,
We're
we're just
discussing.
asking if she wanted one, because I was impressed with it, and I think it'd be an excellent way to start our charter.
Oh, well, thank you.
You want that as part of the preamble, is that the?
I just simply make it section 1.
I've seen it, what is it?
One at a time, because I've got Jason and next.
Well, yeah, I think you did a good job with that. To me, I mean, I see the idealism in that, and to me, I feel like that maybe belongs in the preamble. I mean, that's at least the idea that comes to mind. And I'd be fine either way, to be honest with you. But to me, the idealism of that belongs within the preamble of the charter. This is what we hope to see this is more about. I think the one concern we have to have is, and I think Ted on the construction section 2.2 of this on Article 2 put that in there, was that the powers of the city shall be liberally construed, because if you remember, Markinson did warn us, and I do agree with him on this point personally, that if you don't have something to that effect within this, then you're gonna have to have a charter this thick, because you're gonna have to write all sorts of sections on weed control and things like that. There's got to be that. I'm not saying you're taking sovereignty away from people when you put that in there, because you're not. What you're trying to state is that, look, there are other powers that the city has that are, I don't know if I want to say implied, but implied by this charter, in terms of, creating additional ordinances to deal with whatever the issues of the day are. So I do think we have to be at least cautious and make sure we include something to that effect to ensure that, that the city can do its job of governing this town. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Go ahead, Jim. And then- okay.
I would like to see in the future that when the individuals are gonna make, or introduce, alternates, that if we see it in print, you read it once, and as I listened to it, I saw a mixture of federal, state, and now city all combined in one, but I'm not really sure, because you just read it one time through, and I don't know if you're probably a lot faster than I am, but if I wanted to really look at it and digest it, I wanted to see it at least ahead of time, because if someone made a motion right now, I'd probably just vote no against it, because I'm not really sure what it says.
Right, me, myself also, Reggie.
I agree with Jim. I'd like to see it before it's voted on.
Oh, yeah, well, and I mean, before you speak, I'm just wanting to caution everybody too. I mean, this is quite a change in the preamble from what has been suggested and what is, I don't want to say standard for a home rule charter, but whenever we deviate from the model charter or what we know has worked in the past, then I think we could be opening our doors to more legal time to be spent, making sure that that's absolutely correct. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, keeping it simpler would be the better. I'm gonna let her speak, and then I'll get back to you. Go ahead.
In response to the stranger, I have seen similar types of preambles, or similar types of, whatever you would call this, both in either preambles or as Article 1. And sometimes it's just Article 1, it states everything the citizens are entitled to. Other times it's just a short preamble. In regards to changing what's worked, this has been around a very long time. Modern charters are the ones that are the newer ones, but Court for the Constitution.
Well, like I said, I would need to see it too.
Right, I know that was a good thing, I did this, if I may, is that I never intended, I was throwing out an idea, and I figured we'd all discuss it at the meeting and go email back and forth and work on it and things like that. I have no intention of motioning anything tonight.
Well, what I'm gonna suggest is, like Jim said, if you're gonna make a suggestion, anybody that makes a suggestion like this in the future, that you got at least 13 copies so we can all read it. Because I'm like Jim, unless it's in front of me and I can really look at it, I can't really fully understand all the big words. So, in the relationship between the words. Go ahead, Ted.
Let Mary Jane finish first.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, I think we have to be careful. Stop making everything so wordy and lengthy. I mean, we tried that before and we got nowhere. And I think we need to keep it short and simple so that people can understand it and they can read it and they can say, okay, I agree with that. You give them something this long, they're not gonna read it. Let's be honest, they're not gonna read it, they're not gonna understand it, and they're gonna vote no.
Go ahead, I'd like to take this.
Well, harkening back to the last meeting, the point of what I did here was to have this conversation there. As Lisa said, there's no intent in any of this to make any motions, but to give us a place to start and to add those words, just like she said, if that's what we see fit. What I wrote here was taken from the remarks made about past Supreme Court decisions and what passed in other charters and what was approved and what was proven not to have been defeated based simply upon the way they worded it. I kept it as simple as I could, using only those words that were part of the arguments before the court before. It does not mean that these are the only words.
Right. Sorry.
I do agree, I think it's very good writing, but I think there's too much of it. And I think it needs to be very simplistic, into the fact that when people pick it up, they can understand what it says. I agree with what's in there, but again, you have to go back to, and Greg said this before, about who's gonna read this. And so you have to have it in a language that people can understand. And so I'm the best one to put flowery words in a lot of stuff that I write, but this has to be simple and concise and be able to be understood by the residents of Wright County.
Great, thank you. I think what she wrote was simple, to the point, and concise. It was extremely clear, and all it did was lay out that these are why we're doing this, this is why we're doing it. It does not set any rules or laws down, it just said this is the reason we're doing it. And I gotta make a comment, guys, don't sell the people short out there, they were smart enough to elect us. So, don't say that this is too long for them to read and stuff like that, because it's not the case. They're pretty clever.
Along those same lines, I think there is a line to be watched between being concise and being direct. We don't want to go there. I think that the people out there are smart enough to actually understand a large portion of this material, but I think we need to remember too that it is part of our job to educate them about what we're doing. And if we do that well, I don't see where there may be any major issues. I liked the language of what Lisa wrote, although it seemed to me it's sort of muddled, as someone else may have already mentioned, the preamble and the powers in the Article 2. So, again, seeing it on paper will be a tremendous advantage.
Okay, so, I think at this point, since we don't have the ability to print that here, for all of us to take, I think we'll probably just table that to the next meeting, on the preamble. Let's go ahead and then go with Article 1.1 and 1.2. 1.1, again, is very consistent.
There is one concern with what I put there that is not.
Go ahead.
I think we need to know what's in the office of the city clerk that outlines those boundaries. If that is the place where those boundaries are being maintained, and I suspect that it is, then we need to see it and know that it's correct. I think that's just simple due diligence. The rest of this again is, there was a long section about, Sue's brought before the court about whether or not you had to put those boundaries in here, and you do not, as long as you can define where they are kept and where they are
And I have seen in other charters where they've actually made that map at time of the charter, an appendix to the charter, so it can be referenced directly.
Which we can do. I haven't seen it myself, at least in years past. It's large and complicated.
Like the boundaries of the.
Yeah, the description of that.
Oh, the description, it is. Like the state of Missouri, it just goes everywhere. All right, well, I mean, would you want to amend, or, I shouldn't say amend it, but make a correction to the 1.1?
I want to point out that we need to see it,
Okay.
right? Again, this is the simplest language I think could possibly be written. And it assumes that one thing, and that those boundaries are set out and on file in the office of the city clerk. I mean, it's an assumption that I think it would be a mistake on our part to just make that assumption without seeing what's in the clerk's
We
office.
could definitely get an answer to that by the next meeting, it seems.
It's in Article 3, it states basically the same thing, that the city clerk will keep the records. So, you know, maybe we do need to look at that.
Her providing the next meeting.
Yeah.
So we can all review them, and then we can say we've seen them. Just
Right.
Bring it back.
So we'll make a request of Teresa to see that in the next meeting. Other than that, the wordage, I mean, I'm okay with the wordage for Article 1.1. Assuming right now that we'll be able to get that information and see it from Teresa, is there any other comment on 1.1? Yes,
Someone said something about We the People, but I did not hear which one of these things this was going to be on.
that was part of the preamble of a lot of other city charters.
Oh, okay. I have to say I kind of like that.
I mean, at least some of us reads that way. I think Belton will say, everyone says.
Yeah, I don't think that's that big of a deal. The words "we the people" were never used in a legal document until they got it broke address when Abraham Lincoln wrote it. And people borrow from that since then because it does sound good. But it's not been part of the U.S. Constitution. That's where it like came from. And it does sound good. I mean, he said that was the best speech ever written, so. That was pretty short.
Okay, in section 1.2, the terminology, that we should be discussing next.
So did you say 1.2?
Yeah, your terminology section.
I think there are two solutions to that. We can make sure that the entire charter does not use any but one of those terms, and you can eliminate this completely. But then the same thing applies to Lisa's point about people, residents, citizens, making that clarification to define whether or not you're going to use either that, or my whole point here was to keep what I had seen from reading ahead from becoming confusing. It makes no difference either way. It just means that we have to, if you eliminate it, we have to be careful to make sure we choose one and stick to one term throughout the rest of the document, in my opinion.
Any other thoughts on that, Janet?
I would think that we should just use one throughout the whole document. That way when people are reading it, they don't see, a whole bunch of different ones and be confused.
I would agree. I've seen plenty of contracts where there's, for instance, one party is I, we, and the other party is you, they, things like that, and it just keeps things much simpler than using different terms. And so if we can keep it to term here, term there, whatever it is we're going to decide to use on, that it would be more straightforward, and we might not even end up having to have it, but I guess we can see, maybe as we write it, we can come back on that once we decide on what it is we decide.
I like Lisa's point about watching to see whether it needs to be amended after it's written, but I suggest that initially going with City of Raytown, Missouri, the City of Raytown be used interchangeably might be enough, preliminarily at least.
I believe Ted had told me earlier, maybe he told us, can't remember, that he had seen City of Raytown, well, assuming it's Raytown, for the argument's sake, City of Raytown and the city used in most of the charters he had looked at, so we just use those two. Maybe keep it short, so we're going to do City of Raytown, just the city.
And I saw that both in prior charters, and I saw it in the sample charter. The other thing is, I have to confess, I haven't worked here, I know that it's a habit to use the term "the city." It doesn't have to be that way, I just know that it happens.
Any other discussion on this one?
And I concur with that, because it does say City of Raytown, Missouri, almost, it doesn't need to be restated.
So the decision might be then to read in the terminology, section 1.2, so that it can be interchangeable. I mean, I tend to agree with that.
Even if we, I suggest we leave in the terminology section, even if we do not use interchangeable terms, just so we define the terms.
Okay, yeah.
And you can change the name of the section to definition too, if that makes more comfortable. It does raise the question about people, residents, and citizens.
Right.
If you're writing a charter for the city of Raytown, it seems to me most people are going to know that whatever you're talking about, if you say the city or our city, that's what we're talking about. Unless I'm misunderstanding what you guys are talking about.
Well, I would agree with that, except for then you get into some legal parameters. I mean, as far as exposing it. Any other questions over here?
I would say that for this, to use the city of Raytown, Missouri,
Yeah.
because
As
it
often as
defines and it's carried out throughout the document. Because a lot of times, these aren't numbered or whatever, and you always will know, whatever point you're on, which city that you're talking about. Because who knows, ours will be Raytown, somebody doesn't see it.
Any other discussion on this item? Yeah.
Just a suggestion then, just in normal language, if I were to introduce my son to you, I would say, this is my son, Ted Azier, and he goes to Raytown High School. You wouldn't always say, this is my son, Ted Azier, Ted Azier goes to Raytown High School, and Ted Azier is, you do use other verbiage, language, so I think what Ted says is very appropriate. Sometimes, when they write documents, they'll go ahead at the very end, they'll have definitions. I think when you put it very good, makes sense. That's all up front.
Yeah. And the other charters have put it up front too. So, well, at this point, in regards to Article 1, Section 1.1, we have a consensus as it currently reads, to where we can have a motion, our first reading on it. Go ahead.
I would just, nitpicky sake, suggest moving the comma outside. Quotes.
Cool. We'll go argue.
I know,
This is that's in part.
Well, we're going to leave it up to you to make sure it's correct.
we can figure it out.
I would, presuming that our volunteering to produce just printed material still stands, before we make any motions, I would prefer to make sure, like Jim says, that we have something in front of everybody in writing for them to swallow before we make any motions about anything on this particular document.
We still need to see stuff in the city clerk too.
All right.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we can, think we can obviously get that done at the next meeting.
I think we can have all of the discussion here in a document announcing everybody inside what we.
Okay. Yeah.
Are we going to put something about residents or the people of Raytown in that, under the terminology?
I can do that because it's probably easier to strike it out than to talk about it while it's not in here.
Oh,
I
okay.
agree.
No, I just, that probably, like you said, probably would be a good thing.
Yeah.
As we're doing terminology.
It seems to me that terminology may be an organic section, growing as we move.
Right. Quite possible. I mean,
And you have the ability to come back and amend if we should decide, for instance, someday to, at the next meeting, approve this and then find out later that it was an organic thing, when we came to the decision we need another term or something, that we can come back and, once you vote on this.
Good.
We can also produce a document, and before we decide that that's the final article, wait till the entire document's done.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would tend to suggest that something I gave some thought to, that we go ahead and we finalize things, and then, once we're done with the entire document, then go through.
Then the back.
At that time, because it gives people time to digest it, because oftentimes, if you hear something, even if you have a space of 2 meetings, you may want to go further and be able to let it just, germinate, let people think about it, what they want to do, and how things are going.
All right, so then, I think that's a general consensus.
We're through 1 and 2, so one and 1.2.
And then,
Let me just get this straight. We tabled the 3,
right,
and are we doing an article?
we're actually not going to actually make motions, our first readings on any of the articles until the entire process is.
I'm going to do my best to take everybody's suggestions and create another document just like this, with as much of that in there as we can recall, so that, because I think it's easier to strike than it is to try to add things on here that you're not looking at.
And, excuse me, and we're awaiting viewing of what the city clerk has on file.
For our boundaries.
Exactly.
Lisa?
Just a parliamentary thing is about, you have to postpone to a certain time, like the next meeting rather than tabling.
Okay.
If there's not a motion on the table, do we have to do either?
No,
Exactly.
Chair, I just say, carry over, right?
All right, then, Ted, you want to go ahead and read your article 2?
I'm going to read what's in front of you. It does not include, and I can read separately Lisa's suggestion, because they're not on the same document. And I think they do both bear heavily on the powers article. Article 2 is entitled Powers. Section 2.1, also entitled Powers, reads, "The city shall have all powers of the General Assembly of the State of Missouri as," let me start again. "The city shall have all powers the General Assembly of the State of Missouri has authority to confer upon any city, provided such powers are consistent with the Constitution of this state and are not limited or denied either by this charter or by statute. The city shall, in addition to its home rule powers, have all powers conferred by law." Section 2.2, entitled Construction, reads, "The powers of the city shall be liberally construed. The specific mention of a particular power in this charter shall not be construed as limiting the powers of the city." The suggestions that Lisa made and has already read include every inhabitant of and visitor to the city of Raytown is acknowledged to be endowed with self-sovereignty and thereby the natural right to life, liberty, and property. The city of Raytown shall not infringe upon the individual's sovereignty nor upon protected guarantees provided by the Bill of Rights of the United States. The powers of the city of Raytown shall be further constrained by its inhabitants, the Constitution of the State of Missouri, the Constitution of the United States of America, and the powers conferred by law when consistent. While some of that may fit in the preamble, I think most of that addresses towers in construction. And again, because that last part is not part of the document that I gave you, and presuming the instructions have not changed, we will put all of that together into one printed document, so that it's easier, as I say, to strike and to add things.
Good, Greg.
I did have one suggestion, in the second sentence, or second line of section 2.1 under powers, it says, I'll just pick it up in the mid-sentence, has authority to confer upon any city. I changed that to the city, because some cities have more powers given to them by the state than other cities. Most notable, I think, is St. Louis and Kansas City has an earnings tax. They're the only two cities in Missouri that have that. And we will not have it even with this charter, so. So in other words, just make it to the city, upon the city. Or the city of Greytown, however we decide, or whichever you.
My only concern about that is context, that it is it's talking about authority of the General Assembly to confer upon a city.
Well, upon this city, this is the.
It might be simpler just to take any and make it a.
Could,
Or this.
or this. Could, the only reason I throw that out there is because of the example I gave of St. Louis and Kansas City.
But the way I read this, it's the state of Missouri has the authority to confer upon any city, which, to me, that's not saying the city of Greytown, that's saying any city inside the state boundaries of Missouri. And so, I think the word any is the right word.
It says the city shall have all powers of the General Assembly, all powers upon any city. That's all encompassing.
No, it says have all powers the General Assembly of the state of Missouri has authority to confer upon any city.
Right.
I see your point. I like my good.
Let's not get caught up in this. Charlotte's next.
Well, one thing I would suggest is when it says the city, the C is capitalized as it is up in the terminology. However, so that the city shall have all the powers and has the authority to confer upon any city, which is any city. It's not talking about the city.
Right, it'd be small.
And then you have the city shall, so that's the city, which we are referring to as right here.
Yeah.
And then below in
The city shall.
section 2, the powers of the city. And again, the city, because you're talking about
My
the city.
typography, that's, you're correct.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Okay, just, and section 2.2 under construction, the specific mention of particular power in this charter shall not be construed as limiting the powers of the capital C city, whose powers shall be liberally construed. Puts the, I just think it puts the emphasis of the importance of the city ahead of, it puts the powers of the city in its place just fine, but it's a little bit different wording, kind of backseating it a little bit, making, kind of limiting the powers of the city. Okay, I'm sorry, I guess it basically does the same thing, it makes absolutely no difference. Capital S and C, I'll be happy. We're going where we're going.
Alright. So we got through those. I think now we'll go ahead and start into Article 3. And we'll begin discussion with 3.1, where his power is vested. You know, one of the things that, you know, there's a lot of different outlines, I guess you might say, for a city charter. Even the model city, or the model charter only had, I think, 13 or 14 articles. Some cities have fewer than that, some have more. I think at some point in time, we're going to have to try to outline what we're doing here. But in Article 3, there's, 14 different sections. Those are pretty much it. So I think we can go ahead and continue with Article 3. But at some point in time, we'll probably have to do an outline so that we can go through these things one by one, or what the model charter has. So, anyway, let's open it up for discussion. And Jason, I think you put together some stuff on this.
Yeah, I'll kind of explain a little bit some of the thought process. Well, first off, I emailed them, should have received a copy of the starting point. Again, I'm going to stress that as I said in the email, that the intention was to serve as the basis of discussion. So obviously, there's going to be some points of contention with some of these things, and that's how it should be. Not one pen should write this, but at any rate, I figure we can go section by section, maybe discuss each. I figure if someone just read the whole thing, let's just go one by one here and see what we need to discuss and see what would be best for our town. Sandy and Charlotte and myself were charged with investigating this process. I just wanted to state that Sandy and Charlotte, we never met or anything. I think we all wrote something to present today just to kind of serve as some talking points. So I wanted to make sure I emphasize that. We'll start off here with Article 3, and it has section 3.1, and it says where power is vested. And what I presented was, I'll just read what it says, except as this charter provides otherwise, all powers of the city of Raytown shall be vested in the Board of Aldermen. This board shall provide for the exercise of these powers and for the performance of all duties and obligations imposed on the city of Raytown by law. So real quick here, I used other charters, and the MML sample charter serves as a basis for this. As you can tell with section 3.1, I wrote this in an email. I'm personally in favor of keeping the name Board of Aldermen. Obviously, there's folks that may want to disagree with that, and that's fine. We can discuss that and figure that out. But that was section 3.1, and I guess we can maybe Sandy or if Charlotte, I guess, want to chime in what they maybe have had as well, or whatever.
We'll give them the first opportunity.
Sure.
Charlotte or Sandy, do you have anything different, or?
Mine's pretty much like Greg's, or Jason, sorry.
So you went with the Board of Aldermen?
No,
That's
I used to have a copy of the fourth-class city statutes. And in that somewhere, it states that the Board of Aldermen is to be used instead of the city council. It doesn't say instead of, but that you use the Board of Aldermen. I think when you talk to most people think of it like the people out here. Because they will say, what's going on in the city council, what's going, they don't talk about it unless they've been here for a long time, talk about it as a Board of Aldermen or the DOA or anything like that. So I am not quite sure. I mean, to me, I think it should be city council. I don't care one way or the other. If that's a big deal, it's not that big a deal.
But by a fourth-class city, we are a Board of Aldermen.
Right.
By those statutes.
Right.
So if we put in here that we wanted to change the city council, well then, fails, I mean, our call city council. So, I mean, I have no problem with the board of aldermen. It has always been a question anywhere you go, and nobody really understands what it is unless you meet another city person that's also a board of alderman. But I don't know if changing that would change anything else.
Except a lot of printing. Jim?
Well, neither one is most right or less right, obviously. Alderman is the oldest political term, I think, in the history of the world. That was what they called them in England when they wrote the Rights of Englishmen, where people had no rights, and they said because we're Englishmen we should. They called the people in the village aldermen. So alderman comes from that word. And what we choose to use makes no difference. For example, St. Louis, which is probably much bigger than Raytown, they're aldermen. And it's just what you choose to do. Whether you choose tradition or whatever. For me, only one thing that I would suggest is we want to keep the people of Raytown as comfortable as possible. So that's would be my concern.
Jim, I also did the same thing. I looked up the definition of alderman and found the same thing. I found out the city of St. Louis was also a board of alderman too. So I mean, it does stay consistent, it's somewhat interchangeable. I'm sorry, Chicago too. Okay, I don't know. Michael, do you have your hand up or it's, okay. Tim.
Would it not cost the city quite a bit of money to change from board of alderman to city council?
That I don't know, what kind of expense. I mean, if there was a definite reason for changing the name, then I don't think an expense would be a factor to consider. But since the word councilman and alderman seem to be interchangeable, I'm okay with either one. I think you had it pretty much.
Well, I was just gonna say, if 10 years from now, if it's changed, there could be a confusion back because all the ordinances say board of aldermen.
Well, let's see that ought to be changed.
Right.
That's what it won't cost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody express that they wanted it changed. Any citizen express that, they wanted it changed from board of alderman to city
I don't
council.
think they do, they don't think about that. They just, when you're talking to them, it's usually the city council. It's not the board of aldermen.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I don't care.
And they recognize the city council as the board of aldermen. Great.
I think that Board of Aldermen, I used to agree with what most of you are saying, but it really sounds like a term from the 19th century, to be honest with you. And I think if you go out there and talk to most of the people out there, if you talk to people, I think you'd have 100% understanding when you said city council. When you say Board of Aldermen, you're not going to have 100% city, 100%. I think it also is really telling when you see what people run for office, they put city council on their signs. You hardly ever see BOA or Board of Aldermen. So that in itself speaks to what is accepted and what is expected by people. I disagree wholeheartedly. I think most people in Raytown would want to change the city council to that.
I can understand the cost that it would be to the city, so they may not be worth it.
I don't understand.
I got a discussion where people talk.
Okay. But I want to address that also. Because I'm told, we're doing this and we just knock it out on our computers and we go home and we check it out. Other than the effort of changing the letters of the words, where is the cost that you're talking about? That's what I want to know. Because I think that it's a red herring. I don't think that's really a true statement.
Right, I mean, we don't know what the cost is, and we have to try to get an idea.
It's certainly not going to be as expensive as when they changed the city logo, the design of the city's logo when they had that a couple of years back. So, well, they went out there about that, but no, they removed decals off the windows and put up new decals and stuff like that. It was expensive. stationary.
Mark,
Of course, you'll use it up in time. You know, stationary, you always know, so it doesn't, from a printing standpoint, it's the same cost to print city council as it is Board of Alderman. There's no additional cost.
Susan?
I will just say that as I campaigned, I did hear a lot of the electorate refer to the city council, and it was rare that I heard anyone out of the words Board of Alderman. And it was a real learning curve for me when I came here in 2006, because I didn't know Board of Alderman from a stump coming out of the ground. You know, I had to learn what it was, but I sure as heck knew what a city council was. So, chew on that.
I think, first of all, we need to find out if there is a charge to change it from Board of Alderman to City Council, and if so, how much? I think that's a starting point.
I mean, I don't know if we can get to an exact cost, but we might be able to get
Well,
to an idea. Yeah. We'll have to talk with Truth on that one day. So, but I mean, at this point, I can go either way. I like city councilman. I also like I don't know why, I mean, can you call it the city council with Board of Aldermen on the city council? I mean, does that get right?
I was just gonna say, I like the term Board of Aldermen just because it sounds a little distinguished in your city council, and it sounds a bit plain, but both of them are completely reasonable, and everybody I think that I've talked to understands that Board of Aldermen is the city council, no matter what they call it, but I don't know if it's really the biggest issue we're gonna face here.
It is one we will decide. It's pretty much.
At any rate, if it's a matter of having to change other documents, I'm all for not messing with that, so, but that's just me.
I can add terminology section.
Very good.
Other documents.
You can always put, they just call us what they want, though. They call them city council or free choice.
All right, so other than the actual name reference, is there anything else that somebody would have to discuss on that 3.1? So I'm going to assume that we can write it out with an alternate version, and then we can, as we proceed through this process, it might become clear whether or not we use councilman or city council or Board of Aldermen or Alderman. Does that seem reasonable?
I think that's reasonable. And you can always do the strike through.
Yeah,
As we move on, the strike through.
The board shall provide exercise of these powers in accordance with all duties and obligations imposed on the city of Raytown by law. Is that by state law?
Living state or charter, US.
So how would that be more inclusive? So just by law is in encompassing state, federal, and all that?
Yeah, that line, if that's what you're wondering, that line, I mean, it's really, that particular line's taken straight out of the MML model charter. And it's referring to just all law, whether it be state, federal, or charter.
All right, so let's move on to 3.2. This is going to maybe be a lengthy discussion. It has to deal with composition, qualifications, elections, and terms.
Yeah, it just says section 3.2, composition, eligibility, election, and terms. And so this is going to be interesting, but composition, so section A, composition. And this is again my personal opinion. So assuming that we keep Board of Aldermen, there shall be a Board of Aldermen consisting of 10 members elected by qualified voters of their respective wards, as provided, and there will be a future section, as provided in the nominations and elections article of this charter. So we have yet to write that, but the nominations and elections charter, or excuse me, nominations and elections article will invest, obviously, more description of this. But I know there's been some talk. I wrote this down in the email. I said this option is a similar structure, 10 members from respective wards. Later in this article, it will discuss the wards and election terms of the Board of Aldermen, assuming we keep that name. There's been some discussion with some folks I spoke with on this commission about discussing the number of aldermen and such. Now, for me, again, personally, I'm in favor of keeping 10 aldermen, and later on we'll discuss the wards even, but I'm in favor of, not to jump ahead, but the ward system we have now as well. I think it's rather nice for our constituents that we have 2 aldermen from each ward, representing each ward, and every 2 years there's an election. And I know I'm jumping ahead on some of this stuff, but all those factors obviously relate to the composition of this city council or board of aldermen. So again, that's why I wrote it out that way, and obviously it's open for discussion.
Go ahead.
I think the number of aldermen we have is great. I don't think that needs to be changed. And I think how they're elected every 2 years, I think has worked good in the past, and I think
It's 4.
for 4, it should continue.
Yeah,
That's right, all 4 years, yeah, it used to be 2, they changed. And I think it will continue to work and serve us well in the future. I don't see any need to change that.
Any other discussion on that part of it? I mean, I can't imagine what expense that would be, changing all the wards from 10 down to 8, or 5 down to 4, excuse me. So, that needs some work from the committee.
And most people I talk to that have wanted to keep it the way it is now.
I know we've had a couple of different city administrators that wanted to reduce the size of the board. But when you reduce it to 5 or 6 members, let's say somebody in your ward or your alderman would be, is gone or ill and can't be there for some time, you have no representation from anyone in that ward, so I think we should keep it at 10.
Is there anybody that thinks differently? Jim?
I would share that in the last chart commission, it was discussed, and you really can get into deep and long discussion of changing it, why it might be better or whatever. But again, I'll just go back to what we said from day one. We want to keep it simple and don't want a lot of changes. It's worked very well for the city of Greytown. I think the last 10 years, this board's done it very well, what they have. And again, it makes people feel warm and fuzzy when you don't see a lot of radical changes.
And I think it's also offered consistency. Because we used to be elected like every 2 years, so everybody was running every year, and it was a nightmare. So when it finally went to the staggered system of 4 years, there was a lot more solid to the, because you just didn't get in there, learn it, and you had to run it again. So, and I think, and I've heard the same thing about having 10, reducing it down. But I think it has worked for the city of Greytown, and it does offer representation for everybody.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody suggest that we change anything with this at all, unless we just move on.
Okay. I think so. I just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance.
I just want to say I like the concept, obviously, the continuity is a big thing, like the Senate of the United States is really, it's only part of it is elected each time. So speaking as a new alderman, or fairly new alderman for a year, it was nice to have folks that served that I can kind of talk to, and kind of learn some things and how the process works. So anyway, moving on.
All right.
And again, I'm going to go off again, but if Charlotte or Sandy wants to chime in on any of this stuff, please do. So, yeah, eligibility, and it says, to be eligible for the office of alderman, a person must be a citizen of the United States, a qualified voter of the city, and shall have been or have been a resident of the city for at least 1 year prior to his or her election. An alderman shall be a resident of the respective ward prior to their election and during the entirety of their term from which they were elected to. In addition, nor shall any person be elected or appointed to the office of alderman who is in arrears for any unpaid city taxes. And I wrote down, it says I added my parentheses to the email I sent out to everybody with this. It says I added the last couple sentences in order to stay consistent with the structure we have now on this that I'm in favor of. And it's something that I feel is this could be a point of contention, obviously, because there's lots of discussion here with this. But long story short, I know the current structure is you have to be a resident for a year. You also, have to be a citizen of the United States, qualified voter, and you have to have, you can't have no unpaid city taxes and issues like that. So, again, anyone please.
Did Eric say anything about a time period of being in the ward itself?
And in this particular one, it did not, and I know,
Current ordinance is 180 days.
well then, I'm so sorry, it's 180 days.
Current ordinance is 180 days.
For the ward?
For the ward,
Okay.
but it's not very.
Yeah, well, I know you brought up in the email, a discussion point.
Yeah, well,
So,
if I may.
yeah.
Thank you. I think that we ought to expand the qualifications for elected office to 2 years, a resident of the city, and 1 year in the district or ward, whatever you want to call it, that you will be representing. And I think the reason is very simple, is we just want people to have their feet firmly planted in a community before they jump in. I think it also protects what I've seen happen in past city councils where people literally jump from ward to ward to run for other elections. It's not meant to be that way. If we're going to do that, then you ought to create a large seats, to be honest about it. But I don't think anybody here wants to do that. For the last discussion, everybody liked the 10 to 5 ward setup and 2 per ward, per square mile, whatever it is. So that's what I would like to consider to be the 2 years of residency within the city, 1 year for an elected office for the board of aldermen for someone to have been a registered voter and living within the district for 1 year. There's something else I want to bring up at this point. I don't know if this is in here, but are we going to be able to discuss term limits, or that come in a later section?
That's the next section.
Okay, then I'll hold on that.
First, Sandy.
I think we need to put in there somewhere, and I'm not quite sure how to do it, that the person has to be a resident in the ward, not just a property owner. Because we have a problem now.
Hold on a second. That's Janet first, then Susan.
I just, on, Jason had said, arrears and taxes, that they should not be, I think that should be put in there for the whole term that they are serving.
Instead of just when they're elected.
Instead of when they're being elected. The next year perhaps they're sitting there, but they haven't paid their taxes.
Yes,
I think that should be a stipulation. If they can't pay their taxes, they should be
So
representing
they
the
should
city.
not only be current, but it should be required of them to go with the tax for return. Susan?
I'm just going to back up the comments of a few people. I like what Sandy said. It's important that a person be a resident and not just a property owner. They should be a resident during their entire term. I see no problem with extending the requirements to 2 years for being a resident within the ward. Wasn't that
No.
correct?
2 years for the city, for a citywide office, which is basically one.
I have no issue with that. I think that the more established a person is in their community, the better they can serve that community. So, and I also liked what Janet just said. I think those are all 4 really great ideas.
during the war, actually I had down 3 years, but I would be willing to go with 2. Because, and I also agree too with being a resident of that ward and not just owning property in that ward. Because if you're elected, you should be vested where you are. And I agree also on the unpaid city taxes. However, you're gonna have, who's the watchdog that's gonna know that so-and-so hasn't paid their taxes. Now granted, that person will know because they keep getting the past due notices, but if they're not hearing at that point, who's gonna be the watchdog to do that, which goes into a whole other thing. So, yeah, that's what I have.
Well, I know the residency has been concerned. I mentioned this in here, I did deviate from the MML model charter when I wrote down the sentence about, an alderman, says an alderman shall be resident of their respective ward prior to, I added this, prior to their election and during the entirety of their term from which they're elected to it. So I did that. Now, we have to be careful about the word property owner because, look, I think just because maybe you don't own your property, maybe you're a renter in your ward and you want to run for office. I don't want to alienate folks that may be doing that. So I think I think it's a great idea to tighten up that word residency. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I did add that sentence there in the entirety of their term they're elected to. But I've stressed to be cautious about writing property owner, just because, you have folks that are renters, unless you're talking about like cars or whatever. But anyway, so that would be a point I'm just throwing out there again. In terms of Greg's point for myself, the 2 years in the city, I think that makes good sense to me as well. 1 year in your ward. I personally don't have any type of issue with that. And Janet, I do agree with your point about the unpaid taxes during the entire term. I don't know if that's something that, and I may be completely wrong on this, that the Jackson County Election Board would have some kind of role with, in terms of, you mentioned maybe a watchdog, I'm not for sure again, because I do know well here's the deal, I do know when you file for alderman, you obviously have to, sign something that, maybe to that effect that you don't. Maybe that becomes, if you were to put something in there like that with that wording, that becomes an annual type statement that the aldermen have to sign and provide and turn into, the city or whoever the powers may be, which I frankly am not aware of. But that would be a point of consideration to, I guess, examine, so.
2 points I wanted to mention, as Charlotte mentioned with the, how does one prove that they live here or own property or so on and so forth. Currently, you can pay someone's bills here, gas, water, electric. You can't necessarily get proof of some of those things without a warrant or some such, but there are other ways to skirt that system and make it look like one lives somewhere where they don't technically reside. So how would we define residence and how would we make them prove it? I think that's far more important than the taxes bit, because that again goes into the lots of paperwork and things. And I frankly just don't care, but I think the residency is very important. The other issue is if we change this to must be a resident and not just a property owner, if we mention property, and here we need to be specific that it is some sort of land or a space on land and not just, a car or something movable or just for legal purposes. Just like that.
Okay. Got 4 people up, let's go complex.
Well, I disagree with Lisa about the taxes. Board of Alderman, City Council, however you want to call, they're leaders, they're examples for our city. And I think it's important that their taxes are caught up if they have fines for tall grass, whatever, I think that they need to be the leaders of the community. They need to set the example. And we need to hold their feet to the fire about it. And I think it is important. On the residency thing, like she said, you can have a gas bill or a water bill or whatever. But that doesn't mean that you're living there. So I don't know how you could address that, but as far as the taxes, I disagree, I think it is important. And they're leaders and they need to set examples.
Well, is it any different than getting them to sign something about paying their taxes, getting them to sign something about them being a resident where they're saying they're a resident? And if,
And you put in there, must reside in their ward during their term of office. Must reside, yeah.
okay. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, two issues that are brought up in the very good ones. First of all, on the question of taxation, how do you prove taxation? You two guys on your computers, if you looked into it, where you could look up Jackson County government, you can see who in this room is paying their property taxes this year. Okay, there's one way, that's the big one. The other one is the sewer bills, and that's pretty much it as far as the city council goes. And that's easy enough to do through the city clerk, whom we are already paying anyway, so it doesn't cost one penny more. You'll be happy to know. Now, there's more. Okay. Residency, it's very important. Residency, the true and the real test of residency for a person who runs for public office is that they have to be a registered voter. To be a registered voter, they have to be qualified to be registered at the residence where they live. If they do not, if they are falsifying that information, if they're using an address that's not truly their residence, that's, they can get in bad trouble with that. Starting with mail fraud, because that's how these things are proven, and so forth on down the line. So you pretty much have a fail-safe way to guarantee that somebody has to live within the ward that they are a resident of the ward, and also on the taxes. So it's not a big thing to check out, and I agree, especially with what Mary Jane was saying. The city council should set an example. You shouldn't have somebody on the city council who doesn't take care of their properties. You shouldn't have elected officials that tell people to go out and vote for tax increases when they themselves are not paying for them. And I've seen that happen here in Raytown, where people, I remember not too long ago, the school board, there were some members on the school board who hadn't paid their property taxes for 2 years, while there was a tax increase on the ballot asking people to increase their property taxes. So that, we have to draw a line somewhere, and these are hard decisions, and I think that you make it very simple, that if somebody breaks any one of these rules, that they basically remove themselves from the board. You shouldn't have to go throw them out, they've done it themselves already.
Well, and what I've seen in a lot of charters that I've read, a lot of it just doesn't say qualified voter, it says registered qualified voter.
Yeah.
So,
That's what I was getting to bring. If we wanted to change all that residency.
go ahead, Jim.
Well, of course, I agree with what everybody's saying. That's why it has always been and is in almost every charter. But I want to just throw out some food for thought. For example, your sewer bill, most people think it's a tax, but it's not a tax, it's a user fee. You might want to include the word user fee, because, again, if you talk to your finance director, they'll tell you it's not a tax, it's a user fee. So you might want to add that word. The other thing is that if indeed you want to enforce this, then you have to have a procedure that goes along with it, which means when have you been delinquent enough to be removed from office, and what is the procedure for being removed from office, and then during the course after you've been elected, how much leniency. For example, even if your property taxes, you could be late. You have to pay an interest, but So the question is, what do you shop it at? And you got to think about that, because it's got to be in the charter if indeed you want to enforce it. And the other thing is on resident. The word resident is, and I think our secretary kind of mentioned it briefly, but it's very relative what it takes to be a resident. As you can see in the United States Congress, you can live in one state, establish a residency in another state, run for office, and they do it all the time. And I would also tell you that, I think I'm correct when I say Shane Pardue was on the board, he was a renter. Don't believe he owned his house. Was he a resident? Everybody thought he was. He did live in that house. So, and I know that even we had a state representative that represented Raytown in St. Louis. For a number of years. So, again, the word resident is relative, to, if you rent or own a property, or you're getting your mail, or you're paying your property taxes, especially too. Meaning property tax would be for your car. And that can even be wishy-washy. For example, I had 2 homes, I had one in Raytown, and I had one at the lake. I would register my car, my boat, and on my other property at the lake, I could do that and pay all my taxes down there because they are cheaper. And people do that all the time. I'm not telling you I do that, but again, does that make me not a resident?
Do we need to investigate you?
Well, I'm sharing with you why I think most charters don't want to break that.
I know, I'm just.
Because what you can get into. So just think about that, because if you want to make it hardcore, you want to really enforce it, then you're going to have a procedure that spells all this out, and it's really complicated.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Is there some way to basically what I'm hearing is that residency can mean almost anything. It seems to me we ought to be able to narrow that down a little bit more. If you've got an alderman who is not in his ward or her ward, then those people are not getting the representation they should be getting. There needs to be a way to make that, the residency thing firmer. I don't know how to do it, but there needs to be a way to do it.
Well, somebody talked about Jim said taxes, how you can enforce that. It says right on the tax bill, due by December 31st. That's pretty simple. It's right there. If it's not paid by December 31st, then they are late paying their taxes. I don't see that you should cut in and slide. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I mean,
I think the consideration of these matters is extremely important because we do want leadership by example. If we have people who are going to pay their taxes and live here, then we should look for other people. However, I question whether any of us is qualified to, and certainly that's no poor reflection on anyone here, but I think that this might be an area where we need to get some legal advice on how best to package the language on this.
I agree with Susan that we should look into more about, that we should look into figuring out how to package this, basically. And also, if we are to do that, could we maybe determine a grace, how long we would allow them to not be residents, whatever we define residents as, for instance, like a month? I know, vacations can last a couple weeks, whatever. Illnesses, things of that nature, should we put in contingencies for somebody breaks a hip and is in a hospital, doesn't mean they don't want to represent the board? Is it a matter of, should we make them not represent the board because they're not there, or even if they want to be, but they just simply can't? I mean, it's not necessarily a personal issue, but should there be some sort of information on when they can get it back until we have to go through another election, a special election for that next year if that's needed? Just throwing it out there.
well, if I can interject one thing real quick before I go around the table again. My thoughts on this are fairly simple. I mean, I agree with the 2-year and 1 year as we've been all talking about. I think the matter of residency is just that. I mean, just as if you move from one place to another, you're supposed to get your driver's license changed. It's supposed to happen immediately, am I not correct on that? I mean, that to me is proof of residency. Whether you rent or own, I don't think that should be a disqualification as to going and becoming a councilman or alderman in a ward. If you choose to rent your whole life, but you stay a citizen of the community your whole life, that shouldn't be held against you that you just rent. And So I think these are I think some fairly simple things that we can do. We could ask Jason to kind of go through what we've all been discussing and rewrite what he's done, and then we can add that to the list. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna, get to the bottom of the discussion of whether or not how we prove residency or how if somebody's paid their taxes or something like that, but, I agree with the fact that they should have paid their taxes on time. I mean, it's one of those things. Let me get to Ted, let me get rid of you. Okay, that's just my thoughts.
Trying to write a description of eligibility rather than investigate those who are not eligible. You cannot hold office if you're not a registered voter. And you cannot run for office if you're not registered to vote in the place that you're running for office. That is the definition of residency as far as all of this is concerned. And I don't think there's any way to deny it.
Right.
You can own property wherever you want, but if you are a registered voter here, you are a resident here. You can own property at the lake, you can own property in St. Louis, but if this is where you vote, you may not spend 50% of your time here, but if this is where you vote, that's residency for the purposes of an elected body, in my opinion. Taxes are easily checked. It's public information.
And I agree with Red, because if they're living in Raytown and they're, they, got their driver's license in the address and stuff like that. But as far as who's gonna check on this kind of thing, whether, this person may not be here, I think we'd be, I don't think we'd even put that in here.
Yeah, I agree.
It's very wary and very difficult to define, and who's gonna do it.
Right.
Got this,
Football is in, great.
Well, I was just gonna say, what Ted said is right, the authority on residency is the Jackson County Election Board. You don't have to worry about having to go out and the city council approve it. The Jackson County Election Board can do this for you. And they will investigate somebody that's being fraudulent in their voting. And they will go after them too. So, it's a very good test as to who's qualified and who's not.
And I don't think it should be up to us to have that task. Sandy and then can't.
I
Let's
think
put
we
this one
need
together.
to scratch that property owner thing off.
If we just say must reside in their ward, does that not cover everything? It doesn't
I think it needs to be said.
make any difference whether they own or they rent. They just must reside in their ward during their term.
We're all residing in the registry.
Be registered voter in their ward.
You can make it happen.
Right, it pretty much says that if everybody's already covered.
Yeah, I'm ready to.
Could we put in there that the city clerk would check every year to make sure that all
Well,
aldermen have their taxes paid for the current year?
would that already be in the, I don't think they could probably go there, but I mean, that could be done by ordinance or something like that. Yeah, I don't want to do something that can be done by ordinance.
I like your idea of an annual statement, or something, yours or Jason's, whichever. An annual statement saying my taxes are paid, da-da-da-da-da. It's their declaration, it's no one, holding a gun to their head, it's just something.
But that would be still a responsibility of the commission or the charter. I think that could be done by ordinance, real simply.
No, it's too wishy-washy. When you do the ordinance, it can be amended by a majority of the board. This is something that's with the people, that cannot be amended by the majority of the board. The only way you can amend it is to take it back to the voters and say, do you want to change this?
Right.
And I think it's very, very clearly and plainly stated that we believe that people should have to have paid their taxes if they're going to serve on this elected body. So if you put it as just an ordinance, it can be changed, just as I've seen ordinances changed.
Well, I'm not saying
For our city administrator.
I'm not saying change that by ordinance. I'm saying that the city could have an ordinance that says that the aldermen have to provide some type of affidavit.
I think you ought to put it in this document.
The city clerk, when you run for office, checks to make sure that your taxes are up to date as of January the 1st of that year.
And that you sign something.
You sign something every
That
year.
when you're running, that you are current.
That's when you're
Okay.
running, that's not really your term.
It's not throughout the 4 years.
Let Jason speak.
I think I may have a possible solution to this problem. So if I was to rewrite the eligibility with the tax component and said, has no unpaid city taxes or something like, and then maybe just mention that there'd be an annual check or something. The point is, I guess what I'm afraid of is, and I'm okay with that, but I'm afraid of doing the city clerk's job for them in this. I think that the charter says that, look, that they're gonna they can't have unpaid taxes throughout their entire term. Then by law, an ordinance, is gonna have to come and comply with this charter.
Yeah.
If I put that in there. So I think if you just show the way, if you will, with the charter, the board's gonna fall in line if you write it different. Or at least they're legally gonna have to. They can't just ignore the charter. So, I think that the idea should be, at least in my opinion, on this, if you want an annual check for unpaid city taxes, to just sit there and say that, that there cannot be unpaid city taxes throughout the entirety of this individual's term as alderman. I guess that's my suggestion, if you will.
Let's invite that.
I use the word current. If you said the word current, these are all paid.
I'm sorry.
If you use the word current,
Oh, current, okay.
that means that's not a long sentence, but that means they're always paid.
Okay, election terms and term limitations.
Okay, more discussion. Section C here, 3.2. Section 3.2 is part C here. Election and terms. Again, this is my own personal view. Each ward shall have 2 aldermen on staggered election cycles, ensuring that 5 alderman positions shall be elected at each municipal general election. Aldermen shall be elected to serve staggered 4-year terms. The term and order of elected alderman positions shall keep with the continuity from the previous structure of government, if you will, and status prior to this charter. And I put down, this is a way to attempt to write our structure that we have now, which I'm in favor of, on election and terms, which I favor. I'm sure there's going to be debate on potential changes, but this is my suggestion. So,
Would you say prior to the charter?
the term and last sentence of the section was that the term and order of elected alderman positions shall keep with the continuity from the previous structure and status prior to this charter.
And that is what we are doing currently.
Yeah,
As a board by city.
yes.
So that's what you're referring to in
Yes.
previous structure and status prior.
Prior to this charter. So assuming this charter passes, and that this again, what I was in favor of is keeping that structure. So that way that the terms are on, hypothetically, if this passes, the terms are on the same, I guess, course that they're on now.
I'm not sure what you mean. The terms are on course with the are now.
Your election, okay, your term ends when? April?
Oh, okay, I
Season.
understand. Okay.
Yeah, so then, that way, okay, so then,
all right, I
yeah.
got
Okay.
Yeah.
So that way, regardless if the charter passes in April or not, my term still expires in 2017. Yeah, April 2017, or at least according to that theory here. So, and again, some of this was taken from MML, and again, some of this was modified with my own writing to try to explain the process. So, anyway, take it forward.
Lisa, you got anything to say?
I understand the word structure, but to what does status refer?
Status, like in terms of the time of the term when they expire. Is the status?
Structure.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that's different from structure, or is it?
Well, when I say status, you know, if this charter passes in April 2015, or, yeah, 2015, me personally, I have 2 years left on my term. So when I said status, I guess that's what I was implying.
Jason, let me just ask you a question. You've got on here, each ward shall have 2 aldermen on staggered election cycles. Wouldn't that be, you're right, never mind, scratch. Sorry.
But that will come up later, because you have another section here that talks about every regular municipal election. You can't have 4-year terms if you have to be elected at every cycle. Just heads up.
You know what, and that's, I guess the idea was to try to keep it with that, so that's a good call. We'll probably have to scratch that on.
And it's an election
Because
cycle.
I'm thinking.
It's every 2 years.
I'm thinking, yeah, and so I'm, again, obviously, if you have municipal general elections on opposite years, you have 1, 2 years from now, so, yeah, that's a good call.
Any other discussion? Yeah, correct.
We are going to discuss term limits at this point.
Yep.
My point of view, the question is, do you want to have term limits of 2 terms, or 3 terms? Do you 8, 12 years, 8 over 12 years? Personally, I think 2 terms, 8 years is a long, long time, and that should be plenty.
How many years did you serve?
27. I've seen a lot.
Personally, I would be up to the voters.
I agree.
There are a lot of people not speaking up.
Well, Michael said, it should be up to the voters, whether it's 2 terms, 3 terms, 2 consecutive.
Let's just talk term limits in general, and that's probably more clear.
Well, my thought is, we have term limits. If you don't like your alderman, vote them out.
I think that's what makes consensus.
My personal opinion is, it's not simply a question of my opinion, but I believe the majority of the voters out there in Graytown would prefer term limits. And I think if you look around, you're seeing this happen in other communities. Lee Summit has term limits, Kansas City has term limits, the state of Missouri has term limits, and the state senate, governor's term limited. It's changes that are happening in how we govern ourselves in this country. 20 years ago, you didn't have them. Now you do.
Well, the qualified lease summits, I know that there's no limit to the number of terms a person can serve. Yeah, right, they're limited to 2 consecutive.
Hard to come back from the dead.
I do have some concerns over this. Number one, the complexity of our city is changing rapidly. And I'm not saying that everybody that moves here is bad, I'm not saying everybody that leaves here is good, you know? But it's changing, and I think you need to be careful, because you don't know what's gonna be elected. And people have the choice right now, if they don't want them in here, they can take them out. So I think you need to be careful about term limits.
Is there currently term limits?
No.
No.
And that's my only concern. That's a substantive change. I'm concerned that any substantive change like that's going to become a point of contention and could kill this whole project. I'm not disagreeing with whether or not we ought to have it. Provide an end here, that would take the first step towards creating something that's so different that we're running a huge risk.
I mean, it is a living document.
I just think that it's a popular idea for the charter, and I think it will actually help you gain votes. I don't think it's going to take votes. You're not going to go to somebody and say, hey, we're going to, if you pass this, you're going to have term limits. Nobody's going to say, damn, I'm going to vote for that because of that. That's not going to be heard.
First of all, I'm not telling you I know which is better. I voted for term limits when the state of Missouri did that. But like Greg, I thought it made sense. Since that time, I've talked to people who also voted for it, the kind in which they didn't. I'll throw this out, if you're gonna have term limits, you have to have term limits for everybody, not just all of them. Which also means your chief. I don't know if that would be a very good idea. Because the concept of a person being in a position, and that's what they're saying even, is that if you want professional politicians, you're better off to keep them longer. Certainly it'd be obvious with your chief of police. You know, you wouldn't want to be changing every 8 years. We wouldn't automatically change our CEOs of a company every 8 years just because we want a new one, but just thought to think about. Because I think that's what it really boils down to. And again, I said in the beginning, I'm not sure what's best, but there's what we did in the state of Missouri. I've heard people, like I said, who supported it, campaigned for it, and since then have doubts about it.
I think that term limits might be warmly embraced. I do have a question, which maybe someone can answer for me. Does including the word consecutive term limits make a difference? And there, I think that might be something worthy of consideration. Because that does not exclude a person from running and holding office multiple times up to X number of years. Taking a little breather, and then maybe coming back if they're still warmly embraced.
But that would be their own choice, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Are you ready to do this?
I am, thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Charlotte, I think you were.
Well, and, I mean, I really don't have trouble with that, because I do think that a lot of times you can get in there forever and a day, and you just stay there forever and a day, and there's no influx of new people. And everybody's all figured out about that. But I think that, you know, the way we have it on the staggered cycles of, you know, there's not a majority, I mean, there's 5 in each term, but there's 4 years between them, has come along in solidifying the learning process. So, I mean, I really wouldn't be against, you know, 8 or 12 years.
Jason.
Well, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the idea of, well, I think real term limits are needed in DC as opposed to the state of Missouri or locally, though, to be honest with you. Look, here's the deal. There's an incumbency advantage in the state and federal government, and the idea was that there was enough money being funneled in that things were getting more corrupt than usual, politics, and so term limits were put in place to kind of alleviate that. If you live in a town where there's only 30,000 people, I didn't see a bunch of special interest money funneled in during my campaign when I ran against an incumbent. I honestly don't see the practical need for it, at least from my perspective. Like I said, I'm a fan of term limits, especially at the federal level. I wish there was term limits there, or at least for Congress. But yeah, I don't really see the need for it in a town of 30,000 people. I don't see a great incumbency advantage at all. There's not special interest money being funneled in here. If we keep it partisan, I'm not going to get off of that right now. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that regard, and I do think you may run into some problems. I mean, hypothetically, if you had term limits, you may have an issue in Ward 5 last election cycle. I mean, depending on what the term limits are. I mean, we had an alderman run unchallenged because the person ran against them couldn't pay their taxes. So anyway, that's just something that's a point of consideration I'm throwing out there. So.
I'm just gonna throw this out, you can't find anybody to run for school board, and I know that's a whole different element. You don't have that many people lined up to run for alderman either, when election time comes. So I think it's something you better think about.
The only thing I wanted to add was, I understand what Jim's saying, that you're going to have term limits for one group, you should have it for all groups. And I do not especially agree with that. I don't think that is a rule that you have to follow, or if it is, even as a rule, it's just a thought. If some offices for your elected representatives, I believe that it would be helpful. I think also that the power of incumbency is great even on a local level when you're running for office. Name recognition and so forth, because it is somewhat of a campaign, almost everything that happens up here. People, they very carefully measure their words when they speak publicly, because they don't want to be seen in a bad light in the public's image of them. And it's something that the challenger does not have the ability to go with. So my point being that the term limits, I think that if you have open seats, there's always, I can't think of any time when we had an open seat where somebody didn't run for the office. We've always been able to find candidates.
Can you hold that microphone to me?
What?
Maybe.
Well,
All right. Okay, I'm gonna put my 2 cents on the term limits deal. I would hate to see myself, somebody that is exceptionally qualified, that really cares for their community, be limited to 2 terms. I mean, to me, that almost goes against the Constitution to limit somebody to 2 or 3 terms. I mean, the citizens have a right to vote for somebody, and the person has a right to run for a position. And in our community, I don't see a reason for term limits, and that's just my 2 cents. I have to agree with Jim, Charlotte.
I just have a question though, because we were talking about this. If this were to pass, and let's say there's term limits and stuff, then when does that start? Does that start?
it starts with the charter.
It starts with the charter. There's a
It's
transition.
just not going retroactive.
Well, this ex post facto law is real legal.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would be going forward. Okay.
Right.
Just check.
Put my 2 cents worth in. I'll leave it up, stay like it is now. It's not like Pendergast here, we're not that big. This is Raytown. We have voters here that are very intelligent people. They can figure out who they want up there. And it would do good to have people that are like you just talked about, that are people interested in doing that and doing a good job and trying hard to do the right thing. If they're not doing the right thing, then they get elected out.
Get voted out.
They get voted out. So that's the way it ought to be. And there's also some of these other charters, I think they're really good for giving us some fantastic ideas about look at those. But I really don't care what other cities are doing. I think we should do what Raytown needs, not what Lisa or anybody else is doing, to do what the city of Raytown citizens need us to do for them and what they've asked us to do.
One last comment.
This is just a clarification. I didn't mean in my comments about the Summit Kansas City, as because they do it, but in 2 of those examples I gave of the 3, at least some was done in the charter process. They put term limits in the charter commission did. In Kansas City, it was done by initiative petition. In the state of Missouri, it was done by initiative petition. And I think that buttresses my argument that it is a popular thing that people want and accept and believe is the best course to take. These came directly from the people. They were voted in by the people. They won by large majorities. They were challenged in court by office holders who didn't want to go, and they all lost in court.
All right. With that, let's go to 3.3, compensation.
Compensation expenses. And again, assuming these keep the name Board of Aldermen, City Council interchangeable. The Board of Aldermen may determine the annual compensation of this board by ordinance and shall receive their actual necessary expenses incurred in the performance of their duties of office.
Can you read that one more time?
Sure. The Board of Aldermen may determine the annual compensation of this board by ordinance and shall receive their actual and necessary expenses incurred in the performance of their duties of office.
I would assume that's pretty much the way it is right now.
I'll add this for the, what we do is, it goes to a citizen oversight committee. Anybody gets, so usually, it never goes to the Board of Aldermen, it goes, they have to pass it. But whatever the citizen oversight committee recommends is what they do. In the last, I don't know, 10 years, they recommended no increase. So sometimes we increase the chief of police, but the Alderman has no change.
So,
This is the compensation for the Board of Alderman members, and strictly just the Board of Alderman members. And it's just saying, I looked at other charters as well in MML, and it was pretty basic, pretty standard on this.
yeah.
Set by ordinance is what pretty much it's saying.
But as Jim was saying, though, there's an oversight committee
Yeah.
that makes a recommendation.
And if it were a raise, it wouldn't take place until after the next election.
Right. So is that something that you would want to include?
I think it's by
It
ordinance.
is by-
It's by ordinance, so there's an ordinance already sets that up, so.
But why does it include the mayor in this conference?
Well, the
That's that's
it's a separate section.
That's a separate section.
Yeah, mayor's part of the council, but, we, in fact, the mayor is, the discussion of the mayor is section 3.4. I'm just double checking what I put down, if that includes that or not.
But that's a miracle too.
Well, it's discussed in the mayor pro tem as well in the mayor section 3.4. But, I'll have to double check, that may be an idea to include in that, obviously. So I'll write that down.
Lisa?
Two potential issues. In the first part of the sentence, the Board of Aldermen may determine the annual compensation of this council by ordinance. If citizens are allowed to bring petitions for ordinances or against ordinances, would that not exclude the Board of Aldermen in some situations? Do we need to account for that? And the other issue is, it says, the ordinance will determine the compensation, but not anything necessarily about when the compensation is due or anything of that nature. Is that something that should be mentioned here or?
Compensation set in the ordinance.
The ordinance will address.
I'm just saying it was not
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, sure.
Susan?
And if their actual necessary expenses are as approved by citizens oversight committee, what's wrong with including that particular language within the charter? I mean, you say it's in the end, I don't understand all the mechanisms here. You say it's done by ordinance that way. If it's done by ordinance that way, what's wrong with including that particular language within the charter so that it remains a job of the citizens oversight committee to approve those?
Are you asking me a
I'm
question?
not asking you a question, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I can respond.
Let him respond to her question.
The mechanism that is the Citizens Oversight Committee is created by the current board. And I think this is kind of like the discussion we had before. This is to determine, this is the general, here's how it will be. I think if we determine how the ordinance comes up, or what mechanism they use to determine actual necessary expenses and things like that, I just think that's, it doesn't belong in the charter. That's a mechanism. We're telling them that they must do this. The where's, how's, the machinery to do it.
That's kind of the point I was just going to make, because to me, the concept is that the structure's in place.
That moves my point, my question.
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
I'm sure.
That's Sandy, you think, Craig?
I was just going to say that it's somewhat a creature of the mayor in charge, but that's what this oversight committee gave me. I heard when it was formed. And I don't even know if we did it by ordinance. I think that he created the oversight committee and appointed it with board approval. But I don't think there was anything written in law on it. Because it's not a law-making body. You know, it's a recommending body. Eventually, at the end of the day, the Board of Aldermen is going to vote on it. There's no way around that. That's where it stops.
I was just going back, as my one question wasn't answered, but I don't think it matters. So.
right, Sandy.
I remember when I was on the council that, this is gonna sound terrible, everybody, but some of the people on there have been on there forever and ever and ever and ever. I do think there needs to be a turnover more often in some of the oversight committees. But that might be by ordinance also.
Any more discussion on this one?
I agree with Sandy, I think we need to set up time maybe that they serve on these oversight committees. Because how are you ever gonna get any new ideas or any new people involved if you keep putting the same, I'm gonna use this term, old people on there, year after year after year?
But is that a responsibility of this commission or the charter? Usually,
Probably not.
okay, you want that.
Again, probably nothing to do with the charter's responsibilities here, however, it does seem a bit like the hot start man now.
I know. But that's not our responsibility on that one. Any other discussion? All right, so I think we get through that one. 3.4.
Okay, I keep saying it's every section. Again, this is my opinion. Section 3.4, mayor. There's a bit here, so, and I'm gonna try to bring it out here. A mayor shall be elected at large each, I already wrote this, I wrote down each mayor. Thanks. So there's one problem there. A mayor should be elected at large for a term of 4 years. We'll just put it that way. The mayor shall be a member of the Board of Aldermen and shall have the same qualifications for election as required for the other aldermen. The mayor shall serve as chairman and preside at meetings of the Board of Aldermen. Shall have the right to vote only in a situation of a split decision by the alderman, that probably be Ward 2, and shall be recognized as head of city government for all legal and ceremonial purposes and by the governor for purposes of military law. That was taken straight out of the MML. The mayor shall have no administrative duties and shall have no veto power. The Board of Aldermen shall elect from among its members. Actually, I can stop there before I go to the mayor pro tem if you guys would prefer.
Please.
Okay, so because the second part of this is about the mayor pro tem, so I'll probably stop just to talk about.
Does the current mayor have veto power?
My understanding is he does not.
And he does,
And I'm mistaken, yeah.
I found it more when the mayor vetoed things, not this one.
Okay, and maybe that's why.
But I don't know, they may make changes to.
Well, because there's a veto power that they have.
And
they also
sign
only-
it, not sign.
We overrode
He
it.
doesn't sign it, it's the same as veto, but this is right veto.
I think it becomes law if the mayor doesn't sign it, as long as a certain amount of time passes.
Yeah,
Right.
you're right.
It can still become law, it just becomes law without the signature.
I know it was a veto.
Yeah, there's a veto, because I remember we overrode one time.
I think there is.
That's my mistake.
And the aspect that they only vote in situations of the times.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna let Lisa talk, and I'm gonna ask a couple questions.
Shall have the right to vote, should be changed to shall have the privilege of voting.
I mean, it's just a discussion, but
Say that again, please.
Changing right to privilege, as much as it can be right to be a chairman or preside or be on the board or whatnot. It's just a terminology problem that could get tricky in legal issues.
Says right in here.
yeah, so I mean, I'm just going off what the MML had, and I didn't.
Okay, my biggest question centers around, in our current form of government, is the mayor considered part of the Board of Aldermen, City Council?
Yes.
Because in some communities, they are not, and the only section here would be about Mayor Pro Tem, and the mayor section is actually the next section, Article 4. So I don't know what the consensus is and all this.
The
pitch my 2 cents in really. I don't think the mayor should sit on the board of aldermen. I think it's a conflict of interest.
Can I chime in? Oh, sorry, okay. And the understanding I have is that the mayor serves as the chairman of this board. And so, when I've checked other similar, I guess, structures to what I see in Raytown, with other charters, they did have the wording that, that this individual, was, worded like chairman of this council or chair of the board of aldermen, whatever you wish. So, again, that seemed to be something that was consistent throughout.
The mayor did include the presiding officer.
Well, then it goes into the mayor pro tem, but I haven't read that part of it yet.
Right. Practical matter, the mayor does not have a vote as an equal board of aldermen. If he did, you could have theoretically 6 to 5 votes to pass ordinances that way, and that does not happen. So the only time he can vote is if there's a 5-5 tie. And then, because of any ordinance on a 10-member board would require 6 votes to approve, to pass.
I have the statute here in front of me.
Okay. Always does say it doesn't mean.
Mayor shall have a seat in and preside over the board of aldermen, but shall not vote on any question except in case of a tie, nor shall he preside or vote in cases when he is an interested party. He shall exercise a general supervision over all the officers and affairs of the city, and shall take care that the ordinances of the city and the state laws relating to such city are complied with. The other thing that it provides that was not listed in here is there was a responsibility listed in chapter 79 for law enforcement, I believe. And I know it was a practical matter that the mayor has the authority to dismiss charges for city ordinance violations.
Sure.
I've seen that done.
Yeah.
So do you guys, I guess the question I'd have is, do you wish to see a rewording on this section? Well, obviously, the veto section, but, that's kind of discussion, but, on the section where I have, shall have the right to vote only in a situation of split decision of the board of aldermen, or the aldermen, or would you prefer a different wording on that end?
That's how it is currently.
Yeah, and according, that seems to be in compliance with that statute that Mr. Bowman just read. And again, I've only been alderman for a year, but I've never, the only time I've seen it is, my understanding was when it was a tie, a split decision. So that's why it's sort of,
And I think as a matter of consistency, I don't know that changing the powers of that particular office is in our best interest. I've been unable to find anything in here that gives them the veto authority. That doesn't mean it's not here, because I'm sitting here trying to race through it. But it does define the voting and the presiding over the board. It also discusses the board having its own president, which I assume is the same as the mayor pro tem.
you guys like to read that section?
I just want to ask a question. My husband's going to come in blue when I ask this, so if anybody has a bed I can sleep on tonight, let me know. Okay, from what I understand, the mayor has no real power as such, okay? He's more like a figurehead. Am I reading this right?
No.
He's got quite a bit.
I found it.
Okay.
The mayor shall be active and vigilant in enforcing all laws and ordinances for the government of the city. And he shall cause all subordinate officers to be dealt with promptly for any neglect or violation of duty. He is hereby authorized to call on every male inhabitant of the city over 18 years of age and under 50 to aid in enforcing the laws.
That's, sounds intimidating. Is it, no, that's the state statute, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
It's
so
the
that's,
statute that outlines fourth-class city government.
oh,
It's the statute that we're operating under
so
currently.
something we may want to consider adding to this charter.
Do you want the mayor to form a election?
All right, Susan's got it.
Okay, so maybe I'm not hearing things right, maybe I am. I heard just moments ago that the mayor can dismiss charges for city ordinance violations, and I just heard that the mayor shall enforce ordinances. So that leaves a bit of space between the two. It's my understanding, and maybe a misunderstanding, that the city is basically run by the city administrator. And so when we talk about whether how active our mayor is in actually running our government, it seems to me that the city administrator actually does that, maybe perhaps more than the mayor himself. Would you correct me?
So are you suggesting we eliminate the mayor completely? There is no more mayor because the city
I didn't
administrator. Like
suggest
corporation,
anything
the
at the time.
CEO, what's the difference?
I didn't suggest anything.
Well,
Somebody posed a question on
I was
whether
suggesting it maybe.
he ran the city a lot, so I'm asking, am I mistaken about that?
Well, it's my answer to the question.
My point of view, the city administrator works at the direction of the elected officials. Now, how much the elected officials flex their muscle is a different debate altogether.
It's one of those, what I read earlier about ensuring that all subordinates do their job and execute their duties. It meant all, it doesn't pick anyone. So if the city has positions that it has created to execute duties, it's his job to see that they do that. It doesn't say that he can't give up some of his own to them, but in the end, he's ultimately has that power.
He being the CA or?
No, the mayor.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they can't, that you can't hire somebody to do that, which is what they've done, and then delegate the duties. The responsibility is still his, the doing is not necessarily his.
Thank you for the explanation.
There is it continues here and gives him the authority to grant reprieves, remit fines, grant pardons for offenses arising under the ordinances of the city, but shall not be so construed to authorize the mayor to remit any cost which may have been accrued by any officer, said city, by reason of any prosecution under the laws or ordinances of the city. So, in effect, he has the ability to grant pardons for city ordinance violations. That's the answer to your question about enforcing the laws and then granting pardons. He has the authority. It's just that part of it.
Lisa. Go ahead.
As far as ordinance is concerned on the chairing of the meetings, I believe that's currently under Robert's rules or whatever they have adopted for their meetings, theoretically. And so I wouldn't suggest necessarily putting in anything confining in this document about that, but leaving it to the specific ordinance, which is easier to amend. But it's just something I'm throwing out there in case there's confusion over duties as chair versus duties as mayor. That makes sense.
Yes, and that should be a distinction. The things I've read are about the mayor's duties, not the duties of the chair during board meetings. It is two different things.
So should we segregate that?
Right, I think if you're talking about, I think his section here about the powers of the mayor needs to consider the rest of these things here. We're going to, if we're going to create a charter, if you're concerned at all about what we have and whether or not it belongs in here, I think we need to go through and consider those things. I don't know that they all need to be included. If you care, I found the veto statute that gives them the veto power of this.
And a lot of those things are included underneath Article 4 that deals specifically with the mayor. so we should be able to go forward with that. Janet had one.
I have a problem with them being able to dismiss charges. I mean, that's state law.
The other Article 4, I think, we can change all that, because that's all about the mayor.
All right, Susan.
I do think that this position is delicate to deal with. First of all, we know that the president is the chief executive of the United States. And we know the governor is the chief executive of the state of Missouri. And generally, the mayor is the chief executive of the city. Now, the question is whether or not you have a strong mayor or a weak mayor. Most cities, and the difference is, first of all, if you have a mayor who runs the city, you pay a salary for a CEO. The salary is similar to what we would give to the city administrator. I don't know how many cities in this country have strong mayors that they pay that as a professional administrator to do that. The question is then, within this charter, what you choose to do to limit the mayor. Mayor in this city can be a weak mayor or a strong mayor. Because who he chooses to put on boards, for example, on commissions, is a pretty big deal. He can, and because it really makes, it curbs the way, the direction the city is going. And at the same time, how he chooses to administer his office within his own office. Because theoretically, as the chief executive, he has a lot of power to the city administrator to say, this is what your duties are on a day-to-day basis. This is what you can or can't do as city administrator. And if he chooses to do that, he becomes a pretty strong mayor. And I don't know what kind of verbiage you can put in a charter that would decide whether a mayor is strong or weak in that sense of the term. If I'm making sense of all this, but I'm just trying to show you that it's, and what Ted was saying, I guess the question is he the chief executive? Someone has from the board to be in charge of the city administrator. They're not two separate bodies. And the board as a whole doesn't deal with the city administrator on a day-to-day basis. And Ted, you see a better picture of this because you're here every day and you're in staff meetings and you see the nuts and bolts of what I'm talking about better, and maybe you can verbalize it better.
When the city decides to hire an administrator or a manager, whatever you want to call it, in order to get the job done, the city council is still setting the rules and setting the direction. I think that's still the way it works. I don't think that while the mayor wields influence, I don't think it's a matter of the mayor telling the city manager how you're going to do things. I think the board does that. And my view is that they feel that they are answerable to the entire board. That's the way they act. That's the way they appear to function to me.
I will tell you that, because I've been on the city council under every city administrator that we had right now. And I know that when the first city administrator resigned, he told me personally because that was the situation where we had 6 people that didn't like the mayor, 5 people that did like the mayor, and they'd always say, how you vote would decide, But they'd say, well, you vote with me, and the mayor would say, this is a tie, and not, always cast the right vote. So I was always in this office, he was trying to pull me one way or the other. But after he left, after he wasn't reelected or didn't rerun, the city administrator told me personally that mayor would tell him exactly where he could put his staff time, what he could pay attention to, and basically what he could or couldn't do. And he did tell me that. Now, you were here then, but and I've watched obviously Mayor Frank and how she dealt with the city administrator and our current mayor. I think they were all a little bit different. And I think they all operated within how they chose to exercise their office of mayor. But what happened the first time could happen because if it's not spelled out, you can tell
And since it's 9:07 right now, we're actually past our. I said that right. Well, yeah, we have a standing rule that we should end at 9. If this needs to get extended, and I would like to at least complete this section on 3.4, and then there's just a couple of motions. I'm sorry.
Motion to suspend the rules.
All right, roll call. What's that?
Does it take a super majority to suspend the rules?
2/3.
Yeah,
All right, motion to suspend the rules in order to continue for how long? Or was there time?
there was no time limit to complete 3.4 and to go over minor new business.
Okay. Jim Major,
Yes.
Ted Bowman,
Yes.
Susan Dolan,
Yes.
Janet Emerson,
Yes.
Lisa Emerson, yes, Jason Green.
Yes.
Steve Gunther.
Yes.
Sandra Rockwell.
Yes.
Michael McDonald.
Yes.
Charlotte Nelson.
Yes.
Robert Moore.
Yes.
Mary Jane Van Bussen.
Yes.
Greg Walters.
Yes.
All right, thank you all. Motion passes. All right, so, now you got a clue now as to what.
Well, I think I do, and just to recap something, I based this off a weak merit system that I'm in favor of, and there's a sentence in there about no administrative duties, and so I'm gonna try to get the will of the commission here, and on this, and try to present something that will be more conducive, or I guess that will probably see. But anyway, the last couple sentences of this section pertains to the mayor pro tem, and it says, the board of aldermen shall elect from among its members a mayor pro tem who shall act as mayor during the absence or disability of the mayor, and if vacancy occurs, shall serve as mayor for the remainder of the unexpired term unless such period exceeds 1 year. If the remainder of the term exceeds 1 year, the board shall make arrangements for a special election to fill such vacancy for the unexpired term. And this was kind of taken bits and pieces from MML and some other similar charters. Again, this whole section is based off the mayor, off a weak mayor situation, I guess. We can get more to that later on. But a mayor election at large, weak mayor system that I'm personally approve of. So anyway, that's the mayor pro tem.
Discussion, go ahead.
First, I just want to point out that having read the statutes, I'm not trying to tell us what position we should take about the mayors. Second, if the remainder of the term exceeds 1 year, the board should make arrangements for a special election. Special elections cost money, that our cycles are such that they're running every 2 years.
You thought that.
I mean, just the next general election cycle as opposed to.
So maybe.
We may have to define election cycles sooner or later, but
Yeah.
since they're happening every 2 years.
Say the next municipal election.
Yeah, but this was going to say next municipal election, maybe he said special election.
General election, or whatever the name is, that way we don't have to pay for a special election, which my understanding is very expensive.
Charlotte?
He might go back to capitalization, but since this is the mayor, shouldn't all the mayors listings in here be capitalized as the board of aldermen is within that paragraph?
Yeah.
Okay.
Smaller.
All right, any other discussion, I mean, with the mayor pro tem side of this?
Is in it that you elect them annually?
Yes,
Okay.
It is.
Well, hold on.
I think, and that's what's normally done.
Yeah, I think that's a good, yeah, and that's obviously that's normally done, but we can put that in there.
In fact, you may want to define when, because I've seen it
Well,
held held off.
And I saw something, it said at something to the effect, in some of the charter, which I didn't include, to the effect that like the first regular meeting after an election, or after the municipal election.
Or after, or
Or after the election results are certified.
Yeah, something to that effect, so I will try to include something in there as well.
Can I ask a question? This is just my ignorance. How, do elections only occur every 2 years?
Yeah.
Is that right? Then, I guess, are you electing the mayor pro tem for 1 year or 2 years?
Well,
And if you're doing it for 1 year, that's when your problem comes in. And is it important to be 1 year as opposed to 2?
I think it is because, quite as a practical matter, allegiances on city council changed in the space of the year.
I'm sorry, say that.
Allegiances on city council changed in the space of the year, and who you want to add as the president of the board can change.
But if they only change every 2 years, I mean, you've got the same people for 2 years.
I know.
Let's say it's a year and a half, so when it goes to year.
I don't understand it. I think right now they just do it every year.
And I'm just trying to understand, I don't have a question.
So the question is, since it
It's a political body.
Yeah, it happens once a year. Supposedly it should happen at a regular cycle.
So that's what I'm saying, it's just make a date certain
It's usually done in April, is it not?
sometime.
Yeah, I think the wording since our charter is something to the effect about at the first regular meeting after the municipal election, if you will, at the annual April election.
See, that's when we had 2-year terms, you
Yeah.
change.
Exactly the election results.
I've never been tied up on how long a person should be mayor pro tem. Sometimes I didn't like the process, how it took place, especially sometimes when we change from mayor to mayor. But I think there's merit in having a 2-year. So I mean, I don't know, we might want to give the thought of how, or I guess does that make ordinance on how we?
See, that's what.
Because it's been really fuzzy, exactly, no one, it's changed from mayor to mayor, nobody really knows.
But there is a process here, and it is that the board elects them.
Yeah.
And I suppose if you want to elect the same one over and over, that's the board's prerogative.
It's kind of important.
It says right here, though, that the board elects them,
Yeah.
not that it's chosen. I think it's chosen now, isn't that right?
Yeah, the process changed, I'll give you my example. When I first joined the board, I was sworn in, I went and sat down, and they elected mayor pro tem. It was like I don't even knew anybody who I was voting for. Then another mayor came in, and then that changed, and then it even changed after the third year. So it's just how long you wait to do it, and who's going to decide who it's going to be.
But the decision who it's going to be is.
It's the board.
It's written in here.
It's the board.
Right. And through the whole process, it was, I think that there were times when we were hard feelings over it. And I just, if we had a better process, we could avoid that. I don't know, I know you got good thoughts on that. It's something to think about in the future, when we come back.
Well, and I know it's been a big deal, but the big deal has been, though, that the board didn't choose, did they?
The board chose.
Yes.
The board chose.
Nominations were made from the board, the other members of the board, and then the votes were taken, and one who got the majority won. And I think it had to be over, it had to have over 6, because we had some 5-5 ties. It didn't really move too much. One time the mayor jumped in and voted that. Was kind of
Sometimes the mayor said, this is what I want to be mayor pro tem. And then we have people on the board who talk about, well, who do you want to be mayor pro tem? Off to the side.
How would you choose, I guess, if the board's not going to vote?
Well, as a practical matter, it's kind of like the vice president. They only become necessary upon the absence of a mayor with a permanent position, something terrible happens to the mayor. And that's somewhat important. I mean, they are the head of the city, and they do pretty much control the agenda, as to how the table is being set there, as, what we're going to do, what direction we're going to be going.
And I understand it, but
So, that's why I think it's important that it be very flexible to change year after year, because I've seen people go up there, the best of friends, and quite the worst of enemies. I've seen people come in enemies and become the best of friends. It's an interesting.
Well, I'm okay with the year. What I'm asking is about the process. It's saying that the board elects them here.
Yes.
Is that?
I'd like to think about it.
No, that's not.
I'd like to think about that, come back, because I don't know right now, but.
So I think if
And
you're
I
gonna
think
do it,
Charlotte would have some thoughts on
if
it.
you're gonna do it annually, you're not gonna be able to use
Right.
the general election as your guide.
Yeah, but I personally feel it should be annually because it's a political body, it's a living unit, and it changes. And it gives you a little bit more flexibility being on the board as to how you want to do it.
I'm okay with that. I'm just asking about the mechanism. I can't imagine
Right.
any way other than the board vote.
No, they have to vote for it. I mean, the question is,
I'm interested in hearing Charlotte's ideas. Well, Jim said you have a lot of opinions.
no, I think she probably has. I would just,
Okay. No, it's more of an honorary type of thing. However, if the mayor's not there, then that person has to have the ability to fill in and run that meeting. And they also are called on to do a lot of the ceremonial type things, or speeches, or chamber things, or stuff like that. The process of choosing that individual can be very skewed, and has been over the years, because there's no real process on how that is delivered. But that is probably more of a board of alderman decision-making thing and understanding than it is to be able to put that into a charter as guidelines.
What would you do for a process then? If you have to define a mayor pro tem, what else would you do for a process other than have the board vote?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The way the board is selecting or choosing that individual sometimes is skewed. The process that the Board of Aldermen chooses a mayor pro tem, that's what we do. It's the other kind of stuff that is more,
And I don't know if we can regulate that.
no, that's what I'm
It's
saying.
just-
What is said there is
I
correct.
can answer the questions.
Can Sam speak?
When I was on the city council, and I don't know if this has changed, but I know that there were people who wanted the position of mayor pro tem, and they would gather their votes before the vote. And so you pretty much knew from talking to people who would end up being mayor pro tem if he had his votes in a row, he or she. And that seems to be the way, I don't know if it's changed or not, the rest of you would know that.
Can we not just put something in there, since if it's an annual thing, can we just say at the first or second meeting in May or April or something like that, depending on,
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, let's make it very simple.
Usually it's the second meeting in April, but they'll have to unless the mayor.
The only thing is it has to be set after the certification of the election
Right, that's
results.
why I was pushing the
Because
committee.
if you're having certified those and you have somebody that's re-elected and you're putting them there,
So if you just do it the second meeting in May, you're pretty well guaranteed that.
You see, we're just picking a date.
Yeah.
What I'm more concerned about was my perception that this process that the board selects is flawed. Am I not?
Well, there's,
That's
yeah,
right.
people majority choose.
But I don't know if we can address that, you know.
I think it could be.
Your concern is just the politics going on between the 10 people. Is that accurate?
It is.
Yes, it's not good.
You can't.
Susan,
I
do you
was
have a question?
just going to say that it sounds like the process is broken.
It hasn't been bad, because it's like Charles said, it is honorable.
Clearly it's broken, however.
No.
no,
I
I think,
broken.
you know, it's fine, and I think what's stated in there is exactly what we do. So, I mean, if there's no other kind of definition or qualifications or everything in there that's gonna change that process.
And that's just the instead of saying, you didn't mention in May, but Charlie did mention something, the city meant to occur before that. Maybe we could include language on that.
We can't hear her.
I think, I believe it was Charlotte who said that there was something that had to occur before.
Certification of election results.
Might be good to include that language as well, just to see my.
If we put it in the second, hypothetically, if we put it in the second meeting of May, that's more than plenty of time for election results to be certified by
No way
Justin.
it can be otherwise.
Yeah.
Because every other year, you're not gonna have one.
All right, Janet,
The
let's
election
take, let's do
results are
this.
certified before the second meeting of April.
That's right, but like Jim was saying, even when he got elected, you know, all of a sudden they were, doing, you know, choosing who the pro tem was gonna be, he didn't know anybody. And so I don't have a problem with it being all people today.
I know guys campaigning as early as November for these good choices. Who got anything mayor pro tem?
So we can always fill in a date, so we got this one covered too. All right, so with that, just a couple of things. In talking with her at West Plains, and I know this is, you know, not a city of their same size, but they met every week for 9.5 months in order to elect their charter. And it's not a long charter, it's pretty standard. I think there's 13 articles in it, and I think it might be 31 pages. We have a somewhat of a time frame of a year to get this done and get it on the ballot for next April, which, in working backwards, can somebody give me an idea of when it needs to be compiled? And I mean, I'm thinking like 3 months before it needs to be somewhat compiled, turned in, and we can start marketing for it. I mean, once it's written, we have then the chore to market it and make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. So with that in mind, we've got till January, which gives us 16 meeting dates between now and the end of January. And is everybody still comfortable with just meeting twice a month? I know we have this room for twice a month. I think if we stay on pace and work through things as we are currently doing, I think we should be able to get done with this. But I think it's good that we kind of set a time frame and maybe outline based on the charter requirements what we're trying to get done when we get them done, I think.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yes, I was gonna say, I think a 2-week schedule is a good schedule, gives everybody time to really put their thoughts together. And you also have the flexibility come November, December, if you feel like you don't have enough time, you can always add more meetings.
Okay.
That's my thought.
This is something totally different, so I'll wait until this is finished, I just have questions.
So anyway, I just wanted to go forward with that. I will try to get an outline to put together myself to make sure that we try to stay on track. I think it's important that we do. Sandy?
Originally, there was some discussion about trying to get this on the November ballot because we don't have much of a turnout in April.
I know, but I mean,
It's sad how low the turnout is in April.
but I think we've had this discussion early on that in order to do this process the way it needs to be done, I think we really need to make sure that we spend adequate time and not rush it, but make sure we get through it. So, yeah, if we could be done by August and you know, get it on in November, but still, again, that's going to be a special election, which costs additional funding. Is that not correct?
Costs more than our budget.
Yeah, so, that's something that we need to consider too, but I personally, I don't see it happening. But, okay.
At the last meeting, talking about lawyers. And Sandy, were you gonna get the name of the lawyer from West Plains that they use? Did I misunderstand that, or?
I don't recall it, but, I know Marcus had said that he had several lawyers
Right.
that
Okay.
were not terribly expensive.
Okay.
Now, as with anything else, though, we made it a point of order that there be points of contact between individuals and so forth like that. So, I have a plan to contact Mr. Mortensen, get some names, and then we can bring those before the council here, or commission, and then other people can add additional names to that.
Okay.
So we can make it, have some discussion on it. Right.
Why don't you just advertise for it?
As somebody that's owned a business and ran a business, I know I know what advertising does and doesn't do, and I don't know if it always gives you the best representative.
Put it on the city's website.
We can obviously do that.
If you do that, then anybody can come forward from that source. But they would need to have a person, a point of contact. Who would that point of contact be?
I believe that would probably be me at that point. So, that's Susan.
What legal qualifications are we looking for? A constitutional attorney?
Somebody that's got charter experience, that's for sure. I mean, and Mr. Mortensen said that he had quite a few that would be interested in doing it for those that were here, and that they were very reasonable in cost.
I think he'd be a good contact to
Yeah,
start.
I do too.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and start with Mr. Mortensen, but we can definitely put it on the city website, and we'll just look at everybody and their qualifications. Any other additional business before we adjourn? Next meeting is set for Monday. Remember, we go back to Monday, June. Well, we're just gonna go on through the process, so, Jason was mentioning about the next articles. I think it'd be helpful if everybody reviews, the next articles. I would be prepared to try to get through all the three, and then have a chance to also review the ones that we've already gone over, and make sure that we're, got the language in them that we want. So I think there'll be plenty on our agenda to do that. To go, the agenda for next meeting, which is Monday, which is like June 9th, would be to go over the wording to the article we've already done in the preamble, and then go right into completing section 3. But I would always have you be prepared to go into the next article too. So that next article is 4. It'd be nice when we could get into Article 4 by that time, which is on the merits of himself. So, does anybody have anything else?
Yes.
All right, you want to go ahead?
You had a committee for 1, 2, and 3.
Well, and that's something that we need to clarify. I mean, meetings less than 4, is that right?
If it's a committee, that's a pretty count.
But it still has to be open to the public. So if it's a subcommittee, 4 or more, I believe. Is that correct?
If it's a committee, it just has to be under a majority, so it has to be under 6.
Okay.
It can't be over 6.
Can't be over 6. But it has to be open to the public, so you actually have to let everybody know when the meeting is, and where it's at, and publicize it 24 hours in advance, so.
And what about non-committee members from the commission participation?
Well, that's just it. I mean, we all, I think, should be prepared to do our input into each article, in each section of each article. So that's why I'm saying everybody needs to be familiar with the charter model, and then try to be as familiar with our current form of government and everything, so we can go through Any other?
Well, let's go back to something we discussed in the beginning of the meeting about the microphones.
Yeah.
There's a cord, I'm sorry, microphones, there's a cord going out from Lisa's computer over there that everybody is avoiding tripping over tonight. And I realize it's not taken down, like we said, the microphone cords would have to be. There's also plugins up there where her stuff is plugged in. You could push these tables back that way and put microphones out here in the center, or just maybe 3 or 4 of them out here. The public could hear us. We could hear each other better probably if it was hooked into the sound system. But I really don't think it's that big a deal as it was made out to be. And I think it can be corrected very easily, equal, reasonable at City Hall.
I just haven't had a chance to talk with Teresa directly, which I'll make sure I do this week yet.
I appreciate that.
So,
Well, it's not the city property, I mean, it is city property and not our property, so we can't demand.
We are elected by the same people that elected them, that run this place, and they have microphones when they meet. The public has the right to hear what we have to say. If we're not beggars up here, we should be able to have a meeting so that the public can participate and understand what's going on.
I think it's just important to figure out, because it really is open to every elected official. I just want to make sure that we're not understanding.
I don't think anybody's going to come and slap a fine on you for it.
any other discussion? Yes.
For those that didn't know, I was out of town attending a wedding, one of my former swimmers, but my question is, so as you review each article, I know you said that we're all participating, but is there a committee that you appointed that's writing that article, or fill me in on how you organize this?
Well, originally we set up smaller groups to meet that wouldn't be actually a formed committee, just so that they could do a fact-finding deal to bring as much information to the table as possible for our whole commission to review. I would still like to continue that process because when people get together, they can bounce ideas off each other. I guess electronically, we can't do it with more than 3 people, unless it's a subcommittee.
And on that question of process, I just want to know what you're doing. So, you're saying 2 or 3 people will be writing the whole charter?
No. I would hope that we would get volunteers to take different articles and choose, how that information needs to be summarized and what information on the current forms of government that we have. And that's that.
One thing I think would be helpful, and I realize you emailed everybody, and I write yours off like they're all on my desk, of course. If we could have, if somebody who does come up with something like Ted provided, I think, copies to everybody, that's very helpful to follow the discussion. And that's something that's served as that in the past, City Hall provided to the Charter Commission, was to provide these copies to people if somebody had the time to put them all together and send them to us. We need 13 sets of this.
Which, good.
I was going to say, my mother would theoretically volunteer for a much more nominal fee, because we do have to pay City Hall, so if we.
No, the mayor has the ability, as we discussed earlier, to waive these things. Ask him. He won't say anything.
Well, in case that doesn't pan out, she's just,
Well,
mayor's
if
available,
he
so she's already.
if he says, no, I'm going to charge you 15 cents a copy, please let me know.
Okay.
I'll let the world know.
But, because she does the minutes and agenda anyway, I mean, I don't know, it's up to you. I'm just throwing it out there.
Greg is right, the mayor does have the right to waive fees to the city company.
I understand.
I know, but I mean, it should be a function that the city should provide.
It's something that
Yeah,
we should start working
we're
together.
providing our time to the
We
community.
do not want a
and to the
political
city.
statement.
Sorry.
We do not want a political statement.
I just want a photocopy.
Anyway, so as you're reading through the model charter, if there's areas that you feel like you've got a good understanding of them and would like to participate on the subcommittee, let us let me know, at the next meeting, and we can get that, set, I guess, so that you can go ahead and work on those committees. Other than that, I don't have anything else. It's 9 past 9:30. I'm done.